In this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the entire story of Springfield and the Simpson family. Let's get started. Before we dive into modern Springfield and how it became the cultural phenomenon we know today, we need to understand just how massive this universe really is. Think about it. The Simpsons has been on the air for over 35 years, with more than 700 episodes exploring every corner of this fictional town. That's longer than most actual cities have existed in America. What started as crude animated shorts on The Tracy Ullman Show in 1987 evolved into the longest-running American sitcom in history, building a world so detailed and consistent that fans can navigate Springfield better than their own neighborhoods. Here's what makes this really interesting. Springfield isn't just a backdrop for jokes. It's a complete ecosystem with functioning institutions, recurring citizens, established history, and cultural traditions that span generations. The town has a documented founding myth, multiple wars in its past, and enough lore to fill actual history books. Every character, from the main Simpson family to random background citizens, has backstories that connect to the larger mythology. The relationships between characters have evolved over decades, creating a web of connections that rewards longtime viewers who notice the patterns. This is the definitive guide to understanding Springfield's complete universe. We're going to explore the town's founding myths, dive deep into every major character's backstory, examine the institutions that hold this community together, and see how 35 years of storytelling created something that shaped an entire generation's sense of humor. Before we dive into how modern Springfield came to be, we need to start with its founding. And the episode Lisa the Iconoclast basically proves that Springfield's entire identity is built on lies and historical revisionism from day one. Springfield's founding story starts with a noble hero named Jebediah Springfield, but Lisa the Iconoclast tears that mythology apart in the most brutal way possible. The episode reveals that Jebediah wasn't a hero at all. He was actually Hans Sprungfeld, a bloodthirsty pirate who tried to assassinate George Washington and had a silver tongue because Washington shot off his real one during the attack. Lisa discovers this truth while researching for an essay contest celebrating Springfield's bicentennial, finding evidence in Jebediah's secret confession hidden inside his famed silver tongue in the museum. The town literally built its entire identity around a murderous con artist who changed his name and pretended to be respectable. What makes this really crazy is how the town reacts when Lisa tries to tell them the truth. Nobody wants to hear it. The Historical Society, led by Hollis Hurlbut, actively tries to suppress Lisa's findings because maintaining the myth matters more than acknowledging reality. Even when Lisa has proof, when she's standing there with documentation and evidence, Springfield chooses the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. Donald Sutherland's character, Hollis, literally says that some myths are too important to destroy, showing that the town's identity depends on selective memory rather than actual history. The real kicker comes at the end when Lisa finds absolute proof that Jebediah was Hans Sprungfeld. She has the silver tongue with the confession etched inside, but when she gets her moment at the town celebration to expose everything, she sees how much the myth means to people. She watches children dressed as Jebediah, families bonding over shared history, and the entire community united by this false story. Lisa makes the choice to protect the lie, putting the silver tongue back and telling everyone that Jebediah was a great man. She sacrifices truth for community cohesion, which is probably the most mature decision any Simpson has ever made. This episode establishes that Springfield has always been about maintaining comfortable fictions rather than confronting uncomfortable realities. The town would rather believe in noble founding myths than deal with the fact that their hero was a psychopath. Lisa learns that sometimes society needs its lies more than it needs the truth, which is a pretty dark lesson for an 8-year-old to absorb. The telltale head goes even further back to show how sacred the Jebediah statue is to Springfield's identity. When Bart cuts off the statue's head as a prank, the entire town goes insane with rage and grief. People are crying in the streets like someone murdered their actual father. The statue represents everything Springfield believes about itself. and desecrating it becomes the worst crime imaginable. What's really interesting is how quickly the town forms a mob ready to literally kill Bart when they discover he's responsible. They're willing to commit murder to avenge the honor of a statue representing a fake hero. That's how deep the mythology runs. Bart's motivation reveals something important about how young people relate to community myths. He did it to impress the bullies Jimbo, Dolph, and Kearney, who spent the whole episode talking about how they didn't respect anything. Bart thought destroying something sacred would make him cool and rebellious. But the moment he sees the actual consequences, the community's genuine pain and anger, he realizes that shared symbols matter even when the history behind them is questionable. The episode ends with Bart returning the head and the town forgiving him, but the damage to his conscience is permanent. These two episodes together prove that Springfield's identity is built on manufactured mythology that everyone agrees to believe because questioning it would destroy the social fabric. The town needs heroes, needs origin stories, needs something to unite around even if it's completely false. This pattern of choosing comfortable lies over difficult truths becomes Springfield's defining characteristic throughout the entire series. Now let's look at the flashback episodes that show how Springfield evolved over the decades. Lisa's sax takes us back to 1990, which the show treats as ancient history, even though it was only a few years before the series premiered. The flashback shows the Simpson family in crisis when Lisa starts first grade and becomes depressed because she realizes she's smarter than everyone around her. The school wants to hold her back or skip her ahead, creating an identity crisis for a 5-year-old who just wants to be normal. Homer, in a rare moment of genuine parental insight, realizes Lisa needs something that's entirely hers, something that gives her joy and purpose separate from academic pressure. Here's where it gets really touching. Homer has saved up money for an air conditioner during a brutal heat wave. The family's literally melting in their house, Marge is begging for relief, and Homer has finally scraped together enough cash to buy cooling. But when he passes the music shop and sees a saxophone, he immediately pawns the air conditioner money to buy it for Lisa. He gives up his family's comfort to give his daughter a sense of identity. That saxophone becomes Lisa's defining characteristic, her escape from the pressure of being the smart kid, and the one thing in her life that's about joy rather than achievement. The episode establishes that Homer's parenting style in the early 90s was basically the same as it is now, making terrible decisions that occasionally result in accidentally profound gestures. He didn't buy Lisa the sax because he understood music theory or child psychology. He bought it because some guy in the music shop told him it would help, and Homer's default mode is trusting anyone who sounds confident. But the gesture's lack of sophistication doesn't make it less meaningful. Lisa still plays that same saxophone decades later, and it's still the most important object in her life. What makes this flashback really interesting is how it shows that the Simpsons were already struggling financially in 1990. Homer's been working at the plant for years by this point, but they still can't afford an air conditioner without saving up. Bart's already the troublemaker at school. Marge is already the exhausted mediator trying to hold everyone together. The family's core dynamics were established early and have barely changed in 35 years. Some people might call that stagnation. The show calls it consistency. The Way We Was takes us even further back to 1974, showing how Homer and Marge met in high school. This episode is crucial because it establishes that Homer was never destined for greatness, and Marge always knew it. When they meet in detention, Homer for burning the gym teacher's car and Marge for smoking, they're both losers in different ways. Homer's the dumb jock who can barely read. Marge is the smart girl who made one mistake and is terrified of disappointing her parents. They bond over being outsiders, and that bond becomes the foundation of their entire relationship. What's really important here is that Marge had other options. She was dating Artie Ziff, the smartest kid in school who was clearly headed for success. Artie takes her to prom and immediately tries to assault her in the car afterward, showing that intelligence and wealth don't equal decency. Homer, meanwhile, takes Marge to prom after she dumps Artie, and they have a perfect night where nothing sexual happens because Homer respects her boundaries. Marge chooses Homer not because he's the best option, but because he's the only one who treats her like a person rather than a prize. The episode ends with them at the miniature golf castle where Homer proposes years later, creating a direct line from their high school romance to their marriage. What makes this work is that Marge never had illusions about who Homer was. She didn't marry him thinking he'd change or become successful. She married him knowing exactly the kind of man he was, a well-meaning idiot who would love her consistently even if he disappointed her constantly. That's both romantic and deeply sad, showing that Marge's entire adult life was a conscious choice to accept mediocrity because the alternative was worse. Mother Simpson reveals the most traumatic event in Homer's childhood and explains why he has such deep abandonment issues. When Homer is 9 years old, his mother Mona leaves the family to escape the FBI after she sabotaged Mr. Burns' biological weapons laboratory. She doesn't tell Homer she's leaving. She doesn't explain why. She just disappears one day, and Abe tells young Homer that his mother is dead. Homer spends the next 27 years believing his mother died when he was a child, creating a wound that never heals and shapes every relationship he has for the rest of his life. The crazy part is that Mona didn't leave to abandon her family. She left to avoid prison after destroying germ warfare, weapons that Mr. Burns was developing for the government. She was genuinely trying to do the right thing, saving lives by preventing biological weapons from being created. But her moral choice destroyed her son's emotional development and created the Homer Simpson we know, someone who can't trust that people won't suddenly disappear from his life. Every time Homer clings too hard to his family, every time he overreacts to perceived abandonment, it traces back to his mother leaving without explanation when he was 9. What makes Mona's return even more heartbreaking is that she has to leave again. The FBI is still looking for her, and staying in Springfield puts her family at risk. Homer gets one day with his mother after nearly 3 decades, and then she has to disappear again to protect him. The episode ends with Homer sitting on his car hood, watching the stars as his mother drives away, not knowing if he'll ever see her again. It's one of the few moments in the entire series where Homer is completely silent, just processing loss without his usual deflection through stupidity or humor. This episode establishes that Homer's cartoonish incompetence is actually a defense mechanism against feeling the full weight of his childhood trauma. If he stays stupid, if he never thinks too deeply about anything, he doesn't have to process the fact that his mother chose activism over her son. The abandonment issues created by Mona's departure explain why Homer is so desperate for his family to love him, despite treating them terribly. He needs constant validation that they won't leave like his mother did. Much Apu. About Nothing shows Springfield in full mob mentality mode, proving that the town's relationship with outsiders has always been hostile. When a bear wanders into town, everyone panics and demands government protection. Mayor Quimby creates a bear patrol that costs $5 per household, and when people complain about the tax, he immediately scapegoats immigrants to distract from his own incompetence. Proposition 24, which would deport all illegal immigrants, passes overwhelmingly because the town needs someone to blame for their problems. The genius of this episode is how it exposes the circular logic of prejudice. Homer leads the anti-immigrant campaign until he realizes his friend Apu is an illegal immigrant. Suddenly Homer cares about due process and fairness because now it affects someone he knows personally. The town's entire position on immigration shifts from hostile to tolerant the moment Apu proves his value by knowing absurd trivia about American history. Springfield doesn't actually care about legal status or cultural integration. They care about whether immigrants are useful to them personally. Apu's immigration hearing reveals something really messed up about how America decides who belongs. He has to pass a citizenship test, asking questions that most native-born Americans couldn't answer. He needs to prove his knowledge of American culture by reciting obscure facts that have nothing to do with being a productive member of society. The message is clear. Immigrants have to be exceptional to earn what native-born citizens get automatically. Apu has a PhD in computer science and runs a successful business, but none of that matters as much as knowing who was the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic. The episode ends with Springfield accepting Apu because he jumped through enough hoops, but the underlying xenophobia never disappears. The next time the town needs a scapegoat, they'll turn on another minority group. The Bear Patrol gets disbanded, not because it was racist, but because it was expensive. Springfield learns nothing from this experience except that sometimes the people they hate turn out to be useful. These historical episodes establish that Springfield has always operated on the same principles. Maintain comfortable myths, scapegoat, outsiders when problems arise, and prioritize group identity over individual truth. The town's founding was a lie. Its citizens form mobs when scared, and institutional memory lasts about as long as the current crisis. Understanding Springfield's past shows that the town's present-day dysfunction isn't new. It's tradition. Now that we've talked about Springfield's origins, let's move on to the family at the center of everything, the Simpsons themselves. Starting with Homer Simpson. Homer's backstory reveals something really tragic about his character and shows us exactly why he became the person he is today. The foundational trauma happens when he's 9 years old in Mother Simpson, but the pattern of disappointment starts even earlier. Abe Simpson was a terrible father who actively tried to make Homer's childhood miserable. In various flashbacks throughout the series, we see Abe telling young Homer that he's stupid, that he'll never amount to anything, and that being born ruined Abe's life. One episode literally shows Abe saying he tried to murder Homer once. This isn't played for laughs in the flashback. It's presented as actual child abuse that shaped Homer's entire personality. The Way We Was shows that Homer wasn't always completely stupid. In high school, he's dumb but functional, capable of holding conversations and making plans. He's the kind of guy who can memorize enough to pass tests if he cares, and he genuinely tries to impress Marge by learning about her interests. The Homer we meet as a teenager is lazy and unmotivated, but not the complete imbecile he becomes as an adult. Something happens between high school and his current state that destroys whatever potential he had. Lisa's sax provides the turning point. The episode flashes back to 1990, when Bart is starting first grade and Lisa is about to join him. Homer has a job at the power plant, but the family is already struggling financially. When the school psychologist suggests that Lisa skip a grade because she's too smart for kindergarten, Homer and Marge panic about the social consequences. They can't afford special programs or private schools, so Lisa has to stay with her age group despite being bored and depressed. Homer's solution is buying her the saxophone, sacrificing the family's comfort for his daughter's happiness. What makes this really sad is that the episode shows Homer was capable of deep empathy in 1990. He understands that Lisa needs an outlet for her intelligence that doesn't make her a social outcast. He makes a genuine sacrifice without expecting anything in return. This is the same Homer who later becomes so self-absorbed that he regularly forgets his daughter exists. The implication is that the constant grind of providing for a family he can't really afford slowly eroded whatever emotional intelligence he once possessed. And Maggie Makes Three delivers the final blow to Homer's dreams and explains why he becomes the defeated man we know throughout the series. The episode flashes back to a time when the Simpsons only had 2 kids, and Homer actually enjoyed his job at the power plant. He's not happy exactly, but he's functional. Then Marge gets pregnant with Maggie, and suddenly the family needs more income than Homer's salary provides. The financial pressure forces Homer to beg Mr. Burns for a raise, which Burns refuses. Homer quits the plant in anger and gets his dream job working at the bowling alley, where he's genuinely happy for the first time in his adult life. Here's where it gets absolutely crushing. Homer loves working at the bowling alley so much that he puts up a plaque in his workspace that says, "Don't forget you're here forever." It's meant as a reminder to himself that he escaped the power plant and found actual happiness. Then Maggie's born, and the bowling alley's salary isn't enough to support 3 kids. Homer has to crawl back to Mr. Burns and beg for his old job back. Burns enjoys humiliating him, making Homer literally grovel for a position he already proved he could do. Homer spends his daughter's entire life trapped in a job he hates because he couldn't afford to stay happy. The episode's ending tries to make this touching by showing that Homer covered the "Don't forget you're here forever" sign with pictures of Maggie, transforming it into "do it for her." The show wants us to see this as heartwarming proof that Homer loves his family more than his dreams, but it's actually devastating. Homer sacrificed his only chance at happiness for a baby he didn't plan to have, and he'll never get another opportunity to escape. The pictures of Maggie aren't a celebration. They're a daily reminder of everything he gave up. Every time Homer sees that sign, he's confronting the fact that his life is over and it will never get better. These episodes establish that Homer's incompetence isn't natural. It's learned helplessness from years of disappointment. He was capable of more, but every time he tried to improve his life, circumstances or his own poor choices crushed him back down. By the time the series starts, Homer has given up on being better because every attempt to change his situation has failed. His childish behavior and willful ignorance are coping mechanisms to avoid confronting how much he's lost. Homer's enemy makes this absolutely explicit. When Frank Grimes arrives at the power plant, he's everything Homer isn't: hardworking, educated, and competent. Grimes grew up in crushing poverty, put himself through college while working multiple jobs, and earned his position through merit. He's the American dream personified. Then he meets Homer Simpson, who has accomplished nothing, knows nothing, and yet somehow has a family, a house, and job security. The comparison destroys Grimes psychologically because Homer's unearned success exposes that the system doesn't actually reward merit. What makes this episode so dark is that Homer genuinely doesn't understand why Grimes hates him. Homer isn't trying to be insulting or competitive. He's just existing in his natural state of incompetent privilege. When Grimes has his breakdown and starts acting like Homer, sarcastically ignoring safety protocols and treating the nuclear plant like a playground, he gets electrocuted and dies. The message is brutally clear. The system allows Homer to be incompetent because he was born into the right circumstances, but it will kill anyone else who tries the same behavior. The episode ends with Homer falling asleep and snoring during Grimes' funeral, proving that he learned absolutely nothing from watching a man's life get destroyed by envy. Springfield doesn't mourn Grimes or reflect on the unfairness of Homer's success. They just bury him and move on, maintaining the comfortable fiction that hard work leads to success, while Homer's existence proves otherwise. So it's come to this. A Simpsons clip show uses an April Fool's prank to show just how toxic the family's dynamics have become. Bart's prank involves replacing Homer's beer with paint thinner, causing Homer to get hospitalized in critical condition. The family gathers around Homer's hospital bed, and we see flashbacks to various moments in their history. The meta-joke is that this is a clip show reusing old footage, but underneath the gimmick is a genuinely disturbing portrait of a family held together by habit rather than affection. When Homer wakes up and realizes Bart's prank nearly killed him, his first instinct is to strangle his son in the hospital room. The doctors and family have to pull him off. This has become so normalized in the Simpson household that nobody suggests therapy or intervention. They just accept that Homer regularly attempts to murder his 10-year-old son. The episode plays this for laughs, but when you step back and look at the pattern, it's abuse. Homer physically assaults Bart dozens of times throughout the series, and the show treats it as a running gag rather than a serious problem. The flashbacks in the episode show that Homer and Bart have been at war since Bart was born. In various clips, we see Homer dropping baby Bart, forgetting to pick him up from school, and generally treating his son as an inconvenience rather than a person. Bart's bratty behavior isn't natural childhood rebellion. It's a defense mechanism against a father who has never shown him consistent love or approval. The rare moments when Homer and Bart connect are immediately undercut by Homer doing something selfish or stupid that destroys the bonding moment. These Homer-centric episodes prove that he's not a lovable goofball. He's a man whose childhood trauma, crushed dreams, and learned helplessness have created someone who hurts the people around him while remaining oblivious to the damage. His love for his family is real, but it's also toxic because it comes with physical abuse, emotional neglect, and a refusal to grow or change. Homer is trapped in a cycle where his own failures make him incapable of being the father and husband his family needs, which creates more failures, which makes him retreat further into willful ignorance. Now that we've seen how Homer became who he is, let's look at the woman who chose to love him anyway. Marge Simpson. Marge's backstory shows the tragedy of a woman who gave up everything to hold together a family that constantly disappoints her. The Way We Was establishes that young Marge was actually smart and ambitious. She's not top of her class, but she's competent, thoughtful, and has clear goals for her future. When she meets Homer in detention, she's slumming. He's the class clown who barely reads at a 5th grade level. She's the good girl who made one mistake by smoking to fit in with her sisters. Their relationship starts as Marge taking pity on a lonely idiot, which pretty much describes their entire marriage. The crucial moment comes at prom. Marge goes with Artie Ziff, who's rich, smart, and destined for success. Everything about Artie should make him the better choice. He can provide financial security, intellectual stimulation, and social status. But after prom, Artie tries to force himself on Marge in the car, ignoring her repeated refusals. He thinks that because he spent money on prom tickets and dinner, Marge owes him sex. When she escapes and runs home, Homer shows up at her doorstep to apologize for not fighting harder to take her himself. They go to the miniature golf castle and have a perfect night where Homer asks permission before even holding her hand. Here's what really matters about this flashback. Marge chose Homer not because she loved him more than Artie, but because Homer was safe. He would never hurt her or push her boundaries. The trade-off was that Homer also wouldn't challenge her, wouldn't push her to grow, and wouldn't provide the life she could have had with someone more ambitious. Marge's entire future got decided the moment Artie assaulted her. She settled for Homer because the alternative was being with someone who scared her. That's not a romance story. That's a trauma response that lasted 40 years. Fear of flying reveals another layer of Marge's childhood that explains her conflict-avoidant personality. The episode shows that Marge's father was a flight attendant, which was seen as a humiliating job for a man in the 1960s. Marge spent her childhood embarrassed by her father's career, lying to friends about what he did for work, and absorbing her mother's constant disappointment in her husband's lack of traditional masculinity. This taught Marge that love means accepting someone's failures and never expecting them to be better. The episode is framed as Marge having a phobia of flying, but the real issue is that she's terrified of following in her mother's footsteps. Jacqueline Bouvier married a man who didn't fit traditional masculine ideals, and she spent her life resenting him for it. Marge married Homer, who is even less successful than her father, and she's consciously choosing not to resent him the way her mother resented her dad. This explains why Marge never pushes Homer to improve or demand better from him. She watched her mother's bitterness poison her parents' marriage, and she decided that acceptance without expectations was better than disappointment with standards. What makes this really heartbreaking is that the therapist tells Marge her fear is rooted in her father's career, and Marge accepts this explanation without questioning it. The show treats this as resolution, but it's actually avoidance. Marge isn't afraid of flying. She's afraid of admitting that she made the same mistake her mother made by marrying beneath her potential. The phobia is a manifestation of her suppressed regret about choosing Homer when she could have had more. Life on the Fast Lane puts this regret front and center when Marge almost has an affair with Jacques, a French bowling instructor. Homer forgets their anniversary and gives Marge a bowling ball with his name on it, a gift that's obviously for himself. Marge is so hurt that she decides to learn bowling out of spite, and Jacques immediately recognizes her vulnerability. He's everything Homer isn't: attentive, cultured, romantic, and genuinely interested in what Marge thinks and feels. Their lessons become increasingly flirtatious until Jacques invites Marge to his apartment. The episode builds to Marge driving to Jacques' apartment while Homer sits at home with the kids, completely oblivious that his wife is about to cheat on him. She gets all the way to Jacques' building, parks, and walks toward the door. Then she remembers her wedding day and how happy she was marrying Homer despite knowing his flaws. She drives to the power plant instead and tells Homer she wants to spend the anniversary with him. The show plays this as romantic, but it's actually tragic. Marge didn't stay with Homer because she loves him more than Jacques. She stayed because leaving would require admitting she wasted 20 years on the wrong man. Jacques disappears from the show after this episode, which is significant. Marge had a genuine chance to escape her suffocating marriage to someone who excited her, and she chose familiarity over happiness. The episode never addresses whether Marge was right to stay. It just shows her making the choice and never looking back. But throughout the rest of the series, whenever Marge is particularly frustrated with Homer, you can imagine her thinking about Jacques and wondering what her life could have been. Marge on the Lam shows what happens when Marge gets a taste of freedom from her domestic prison. She becomes friends with Ruth Powers, a recently divorced woman who introduces Marge to a life without constant family obligations. They go out dancing, stay out late, and generally act like women who don't have to worry about picking up after 3 children and a man-child husband. When Ruth reveals she's driving a stolen car, Marge doesn't immediately make her stop. She keeps riding, enjoying the thrill of breaking rules. For the first time in her adult life, the police chase that follows is played for comedy, but it represents something serious about Marge's character. She's so desperate for excitement and autonomy that she's willing to risk arrest just to feel alive for a few hours. When Homer tries to chase after them and ends up stuck on train tracks, Marge has to choose between continuing her escape and saving her stupid husband. She stops the car, and Ruth gets arrested while Marge goes home to her same boring life. The episode punishes Marge for trying to have fun without her family. What's really messed up is that Homer learns nothing from this incident. He doesn't ask why Marge felt the need to escape. He doesn't reflect on whether he's meeting her emotional needs. He just assumes everything will go back to normal because Marge always comes back. And he's right. Marge always comes back because she has nowhere else to go. She gave up her youth, her ambitions, and her chance at a different life to raise Homer's children and manage his disasters. Scenes from the class struggle in Springfield forces Marge to confront her class status when the family accidentally ends up at a country club. Marge finds a Chanel suit at a discount outlet and wears it to the club, where she's immediately mistaken for a wealthy woman. The other members invite her to events, and Marge desperately tries to fit in by altering the same suit to look different each time. She wants so badly to be seen as sophisticated and upper class that she's willing to destroy an expensive suit and exhaust herself just to maintain the illusion. The tragedy is that Marge almost succeeds. She's charming enough and smart enough to fake being wealthy, and the country club women accept her. But then Homer shows up being his usual awful self, embarrassing Marge and exposing that the Simpsons don't belong. Marge has to choose between pretending to be someone she's not to access a better life, or accepting her actual identity as the wife of a nuclear safety inspector who regularly gets his head stuck in things. She burns the Chanel suit in the front yard, symbolically destroying her last chance to escape her class position. This episode reveals that Marge is deeply ashamed of her life. She doesn't just want nice things. She wants to be the kind of person who naturally belongs in spaces where nice things exist. But her marriage to Homer makes that impossible. No matter how hard she tries, she'll always be the woman married to the idiot, and that association will prevent her from ever being seen as anything else. The Strong Arms of Ma shows what happens when Marge briefly breaks free from her passive, accommodating personality. After being mugged at the Quickie Mart, Marge develops agoraphobia and can't leave the house. She starts lifting weights to feel safe again, and her body transforms into pure muscle. For the first time in her life, Marge is physically powerful and confident. She starts asserting herself, demanding respect, and refusing to tolerate Homer's stupid behavior. The episode could have been about Marge permanently changing her dynamic with her family, but instead it becomes about her losing control. She gets addicted to steroids, becomes aggressive, and eventually goes too far by beating up people at a bodybuilding competition. The message is clear. When Marge stops being passive and accommodating, she becomes dangerous and unstable. The only acceptable version of Marge is the one who absorbs abuse without fighting back. When she gains power, she has to give it up to return to her natural role as the family's punching bag. The episode ends with Marge going back to her normal body and personality, having learned that trying to be strong only makes things worse. She needed to learn her place, This is one of the most regressive messages in the entire series, suggesting that women who seek power are inherently unstable, and that the natural order requires them to be weak and supportive. Marge's brief rebellion gets pathologized as addiction and mental illness, rather than a reasonable response to decades of being taken for granted. Marge's gambling addiction in Springfield, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Legalized Gambling, provides another example of her trying to escape her life through destructive behavior. When Springfield legalizes gambling, Marge discovers she loves the thrill of slot machines. She starts spending entire days at the casino, neglecting her children and household responsibilities. For once, Marge is the absent parent while Homer has to hold the family together. He's terrible at it, proving that Marge's domestic labor has been essential to the family's survival. The episode shows Marge's addiction spiraling until she's hallucinating that slot machines are talking to her. Lisa has to dress herself for a school pageant using a shower curtain because Marge forgot about it. Maggie nearly dies multiple times because nobody's watching her. The family intervention at the end forces Marge to admit she has a problem and give up gambling. She goes back to her role as housewife and mother, having learned that trying to have fun on her own terms destroys everyone around her. What makes this pattern so disturbing is that Marge's brief moments of rebellion are always framed as addiction or mental illness. When she tries to have her own life separate from her family, the show punishes her by making her lose control. The only acceptable version of Marge is the one who sacrifices everything for people who don't appreciate her. Her desires are pathologized, her ambitions are forgotten, and her identity is reduced to being Homer's wife and the kid's mother. These episodes establish that Marge isn't weak by nature. She's someone who made conscious sacrifices for her family and gradually lost herself in the process. Her rare moments of rebellion show what she could have been: confident, powerful, happy. But Springfield's social structure and the show's own conservative values require Marge to stay in her place. She's allowed to dream about escape, but never actually achieve it. Her tragedy is that she's smart enough to know she's trapped, but not strong enough to break free. Now, Marge sacrificed her dreams for her kids, but none of those kids turned out the way she hoped. Let's start with the one who's been 10 years old for over 3 decades, Bart Simpson. Bart's backstory reveals that being the troublemaker isn't a choice. It's the only role he knows how to play after years of being told he's the problem. Early episodes position Bart as the show's protagonist, the rebellious kid who challenges authority and exposes hypocrisy. The Simpsons started as Bart's show, with Homer as the buffoonish antagonist who made Bart's life difficult. But somewhere around season 4 or 5, the dynamic flipped. Homer became the main character, and Bart became a supporting player whose main function was causing problems that Homer had to solve. Bart Gets an F shows Bart at his most vulnerable and reveals that his poor academic performance isn't from lack of trying. The episode starts with Bart failing every subject and being told he'll be held back if he doesn't pass his next test. Bart genuinely panics. He makes deals with teachers, hires a tutor, and actually studies for the first time in his life. But the more pressure he feels, the worse he performs. On the day of the test, he freezes completely and fails again. Bart breaks down crying in front of his entire class, begging God for help and promising to do better if he gets another chance. Here's what makes this episode really important. The show reveals that Bart isn't stupid. He's dyslexic, has attention deficit issues, and learns differently than traditional education accommodates. When a snow day gives him extra time to study, Bart actually passes his test because he was able to learn at his own pace without the pressure of keeping up with classmates. The episode proves that Bart could succeed in school if the system was designed to teach him the way his brain actually works. But Springfield Elementary doesn't care about individual learning styles. They care about standardized testing and efficiency. Mrs. Crabapple's reaction to Bart's struggles reveals how teachers have given up on him. She doesn't offer alternative teaching methods or accommodation for his learning differences. She just threatens him with consequences and assumes he's not trying. When Bart does pass his test, she seems almost disappointed that she can't hold him back. The system isn't trying to help Bart succeed. It's trying to process him through to the next grade with minimal effort. Bart the Genius shows Bart's desperation to be seen as smart by any means necessary. When he cheats on an intelligence test by swapping papers with Martin Prince, the school declares Bart a au furo, genius, and moves him to the gifted program. Bart goes from being the dumb troublemaker to being surrounded by kids who discuss quantum physics and play chess during recess. He's completely lost. Every day at the gifted school makes it more obvious that Bart doesn't belong, but he can't admit the truth because then everyone will know he cheated. The episode climaxes when Bart confesses to Dr. Pryor that he's not actually a genius. Instead of being angry, Dr. Pryor is understanding and tells Bart that intelligence comes in many forms. But then Bart goes back to Springfield Elementary, where he's immediately treated like a problem student again. The brief period where adults respected him and believed in his potential is over. He's back to being Bart the troublemaker, and the system reinforces that identity every single day. What's really sad is that Bart has genuine talents that school never cultivates. He's a natural leader who organizes elaborate pranks requiring logistics and planning. He's creative and thinks outside conventional boundaries. He's socially intelligent and can read people, but none of these skills matter in an educational system that only values test scores and obedience. Bart learned early that he would never be successful playing by the rules, so he stopped trying. Bart the Mother shows that Bart has a genuine capacity for empathy and responsibility when given the chance. The episode starts with Bart accidentally killing a bird with a BB gun, and he's devastated by what he's done. When he finds the bird's eggs in the nest, Bart decides to hatch them himself to make up for killing their mother. Everyone mocks him for this, calling it a waste of time and assuming he'll get bored and give up. But Bart actually follows through. He keeps the eggs warm, protects them, and successfully hatches what turn out to be Bolivian tree lizards. The town immediately wants to kill the lizards because they're an invasive species that threatens local bird populations. Bart refuses, arguing that he's their mother now and he's responsible for protecting them. He's willing to break the law to save creatures that everyone agrees should be destroyed. Principal Skinner eventually reveals that the lizards eat only pigeon eggs, and since pigeons are also an invasive pest species, the lizards are actually beneficial to Springfield's ecosystem. Bart becomes a local hero for protecting them. This episode proves that Bart is capable of long-term responsibility and genuine care when he's emotionally invested. He wasn't trying to be a hero or get attention. He just felt guilty about killing the mother bird and wanted to make it right. The fact that everyone expected him to fail shows how little faith Springfield has in Bart's ability to do good. They see him as a destructive force, not as a kid with potential who needs guidance and support. Brother's Little Helper reveals just how broken the system's approach to Bart really is. When Bart's behavior problems escalate, Principal Skinner pressures Marge and Homer into putting Bart on a fictional medication called Focusin. The drug is basically Ritalin, meant to control Bart's impulses and make him easier to manage. At first it works. Bart becomes calm, obedient, and focused. He's the perfect student that Springfield Elementary always wanted him to be. But then Bart starts experiencing psychotic side effects. He becomes paranoid, develops delusions about the government putting satellites in space to spy on people, and eventually steals a tank to shoot down a satellite. The medication doesn't help Bart. It sedates him and then makes him dangerously unstable. The episode is a pretty clear critique of how schools in the 90s started putting difficult kids on behavior medication rather than addressing the underlying reasons why they were acting out. When Bart goes off the medication and immediately returns to his normal troublemaking self, nobody suggests alternative approaches. They just accept that Bart is a problem with no solution. The episode ends with the revelation that Bart was actually right about the satellites spying on people, suggesting that maybe his behavior problems stem from being more aware than other kids, not less intelligent. Bart the General shows what Bart can accomplish when given real leadership opportunities. When Nelson starts bullying Bart, instead of just taking it or running away, Bart organizes an entire army of kids to fight back. He studies military strategy, plans elaborate operations, and successfully defeats Nelson through superior tactics. The episode proves that Bart isn't just a troublemaker. He's genuinely smart in ways that traditional education never recognizes or values. The problem is that this kind of intelligence only manifests when Bart is motivated by something he cares about. School never gives him reason to care. Standardized tests and boring lectures don't engage him. But organizing a military campaign against a bully? That requires all the skills that would make Bart successful in adult life: planning, leadership, creative problem solving, and understanding human psychology. If Springfield Elementary could channel these abilities into academic achievement, Bart could thrive. Instead, they punish him for not fitting their mold. Bart's character evolution throughout the series shows him going from protagonist to comic relief. Early seasons treat Bart's rebellion as legitimate response to absurd authority. Later seasons make him a flat troublemaker with no depth. The show stopped exploring why Bart acts out and just made it his unchangeable identity. This shift reflects how society treats kids with behavior problems. They start as individuals with specific needs, and they end as categories to be managed. The really controversial part is that Bart represents millions of kids who fell through the cracks of American education. Kids who learn differently, who have attention difficulties, who don't test well, who need movement and hands-on learning instead of sitting still and listening. The education system wasn't designed for them, and teachers don't have the resources or training to accommodate them. So they get labeled as troublemakers and pushed through until they graduate or drop out. Bart's tragedy is that he had potential. Multiple episodes show glimpses of what he could be if anyone bothered to meet him halfway. But it's easier to dismiss him as a problem than to fix the system that's failing him. Springfield Elementary gave up on Bart before he even had a chance to succeed, and his family reinforced that message by treating his struggles as inevitable rather than addressable. These Bart-centered episodes prove that being the troublemaker isn't natural. It's a role that gets assigned to kids who don't fit the system, and then that role becomes their entire identity. Bart became the bad kid because everyone expected it, and those expectations became self-fulfilling. The show occasionally hints at Bart's hidden depths, but mostly it's content to let him be the static troublemaker whose shenanigans drive plots without ever growing or changing. While Bart embraced being the bad kid, his sister took the opposite path, becoming the perfect child who's suffocating under the pressure. Lisa's backstory reveals the crushing loneliness of being the smartest person in a family and a town that doesn't understand you. The fundamental problem with Lisa is that she's surrounded by people operating at a completely different intellectual level. Her father can barely read, her brother is actively hostile to education, her mother sacrificed her intelligence for domestic duties, and her baby sister can't talk. Lisa is a genius living among people who think big words means anything over 2 syllables. Lisa's sax shows that this isolation started early. When Lisa is about to start kindergarten in 1990, the school counselor immediately identifies her as gifted. She's reading at a 5th grade level, shows advanced reasoning skills, and is clearly too intelligent for standard curriculum. The counselor suggests skipping Lisa ahead several grades, which would put her with intellectual peers, but destroy her social development. Homer and Marge decide to keep Lisa with her age group, prioritizing her social adjustment over her intellectual needs. This decision defines Lisa's entire childhood. She spends every day bored in classes that move too slowly, surrounded by peers who don't share her interests. The saxophone that Homer buys her becomes her only outlet, the one thing in her life that's about joy and creative expression rather than frustrated boredom. But even music can't fully compensate for the loneliness of being intellectually isolated from everyone around her. What makes this really heartbreaking is that Lisa's parents made the wrong call. Keeping her with her age group didn't help her socially. She still doesn't have friends because 8-year-olds don't want to discuss epistemology and jazz theory. All it did was guarantee that she'd be intellectually unstimulated for her entire educational career. Lisa needed to be in programs that challenged her, with other gifted kids who could engage with her ideas. Instead, she got condemned to over a decade of dumbed-down curriculum and social isolation. Lisa's substitute shows Lisa desperately searching for adult validation because she's not getting it from her family. When Mr. Bergstrom arrives as her substitute teacher, he's everything Lisa needs: intelligent, supportive, and genuinely interested in helping her grow. For the first time, Lisa has an adult in her life who recognizes her potential and treats her like an intellectual equal. They discuss history, literature, and philosophy. Mr. Bergstrom sees Lisa as a person with valuable ideas, not just a smart kid who needs to be managed. The episode climaxes when Mr. Bergstrom has to leave Springfield. Lisa is devastated because she's losing the only person who truly understood her. She runs to the train station to say goodbye, and Mr. Bergstrom gives her a note that says, "You are Lisa Simpson." It's meant to be empowering, reminding Lisa that her identity isn't dependent on any single person's validation. But it's also tragic because Lisa is 8 years old, and she shouldn't have to derive strength from within because the adults around her are too limited to appreciate who she is. What really matters here is that Lisa immediately goes looking for replacement father figures after Mr. Bergstrom leaves. She idealizes various male authority figures throughout the series: museum curators, jazz musicians, college professors, anyone who shows her intellectual respect. This pattern reveals that Homer's emotional neglect has created a hole in Lisa's life that she's constantly trying to fill with surrogate relationships. She's not looking for friendship, she's looking for mentorship and validation from intelligent adults who can guide her. Lisa the Vegetarian shows Lisa developing the moral convictions that will define her character and simultaneously isolate her further from her family. After visiting a petting zoo and bonding with a lamb, Lisa decides that eating meat is ethically wrong. Her family responds with mockery and contempt. Homer hosts a barbecue specifically to antagonize Lisa, culminating in her stealing his roast pig and destroying it. The incident causes a major family fight where Lisa is forced to choose between her principles and her family's acceptance. Lisa chooses her principles. She becomes a vegetarian despite knowing it will make her a permanent outsider in a meat-obsessed family in town. Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney appear to validate Lisa's choice, telling her she was right to stand up for her beliefs even when everyone around her thinks she's wrong. But the episode also shows the cost of having convictions that your community doesn't share. Lisa will spend every family dinner being mocked, every school lunch being different, every social event navigating a choice that separates her from her peers. What makes this interesting is that Lisa is right. The episode doesn't present vegetarianism as a silly phase or youthful rebellion. It takes Lisa's moral reasoning seriously and shows that she arrived at vegetarianism through genuine ethical reflection. But being right doesn't make her less lonely. If anything, it makes the loneliness worse because she knows everyone around her is morally wrong and they'll never understand why. Lisa's first word provides crucial backstory about Lisa and Bart's relationship. The episode flashes back to when Lisa is born, and Bart is still an only child getting all the attention. When the new baby arrives, Bart's jealousy is immediate and intense. He tries to mail Lisa back to the hospital, cuts up her baby photos, and generally does everything possible to get rid of her. But then Lisa's first word is Bart, and she says it with genuine love and admiration. Bart realizes that despite everything he's done, Lisa loves him unconditionally. This flashback explains why their relationship works despite constant fighting. Lisa has always idolized Bart even though he's intellectually beneath her. She sees his street smarts and social confidence as valuable traits that compensate for his lack of book learning. Bart, meanwhile, resents Lisa's intelligence because it makes him feel stupid. But he also protects her because she's the only person in his life who genuinely admires him. Their dynamic is complicated and often hostile, but it's rooted in real affection that survives their differences. Lisa the Iconoclast shows what happens when Lisa's intelligence and moral convictions directly conflict with community comfort. Her research proves that Jebediah Springfield was actually a murderous pirate, and she has documentary evidence. She tries to present her findings at the town bicentennial celebration, ready to expose the lie that Springfield's identity is built on. But when she sees how much the myth means to people, how it brings the community together and gives them shared purpose, she chooses to protect the lie. This episode is crucial because it shows Lisa learning that truth doesn't always serve the greater good. She's smart enough to prove something, but wise enough to understand that some truths cause more harm than benefit. This is one of the most mature decisions anyone makes in the entire series, and it comes from an 8-year-old girl. Lisa sacrifices her own need to be right for the community's need to feel connected to their history. The problem is that this lesson teaches Lisa to suppress her intelligence and insights when they make other people uncomfortable. She learns that being right matters less than maintaining social harmony. This becomes a pattern throughout the series where Lisa has to choose between speaking truth and being accepted. Almost every time she chooses truth and pays the social cost. But this episode shows her learning that sometimes silence is the more ethical choice, which is both mature and deeply sad for a child to have to understand. Summer of Four Fairs 2 reveals just how desperately Lisa wants friends and how far she's willing to go to get them. When the family goes on vacation to the Flanders beach house, Lisa decides to reinvent herself. She studies teen magazines, changes her style, and creates an entirely new personality designed to be popular. She becomes fun-loving, spontaneous, and anti-intellectual. And it works. Kids at the beach actually like her and want to spend time with her. Bart exposes Lisa's deception by showing the beach kids her yearbook, revealing that she's normally a nerdy outcast. But instead of rejecting her, the kids appreciate that Lisa wanted to fit in. They make her a friendship wall filled with messages about how much they value her. The episode ends with Lisa feeling accepted for the first time in her life, but it's temporary. Once vacation ends, she goes back to Springfield where she's still the weird, smart kid nobody likes. This episode proves that Lisa isn't naturally antisocial. She desperately wants connection and is capable of being fun when she allows herself to relax her intellectual persona. The problem is that Springfield doesn't give her opportunities to be both smart and popular. She has to choose between being herself and being accepted. At the beach, she could be someone else entirely, and that freedom let her experience normal childhood friendships, but that version of Lisa can't exist in Springfield because her family and town have already decided who she is and won't let her be anything else. Lisa's conversion to Buddhism in later seasons shows her continuing to search for meaning outside her family and community. When she discovers Buddhism, it offers her a framework for understanding suffering and finding peace with being different. Lisa embraces Buddhist philosophy because it validates her sense that material attachment and conventional success aren't fulfilling. She's found a spiritual practice that matches her intellectual and ethical values, but this also further isolates her from her Christian family and community. Lisa is now religiously different, ethically different, and intellectually different from everyone around her. Every aspect of her identity separates her from the people she's supposed to be closest to. Homer doesn't understand her Buddhism. Marge worries it's a phase. Bart thinks it's stupid. Lisa's search for meaning and community just makes her more alone. Lisa's depression episodes throughout the series show the toll this isolation takes. Multiple episodes feature Lisa having existential crises where she questions whether anything matters and whether she'll ever find happiness. For an 8-year-old to regularly confront nihilistic despair suggests that something is deeply wrong with her environment. Lisa isn't naturally depressed. She's depressed because she's trapped in a life that offers no intellectual stimulation, no social connection, and no hope that things will improve. The future episodes that flash forward to Lisa as an adult show her becoming successful, but not necessarily happy. She's president in one timeline, a famous jazz musician in another, but she's always slightly melancholic, as if success couldn't compensate for her lonely childhood. The implication is that the damage has already been done. Lisa's formative years were spent isolated and misunderstood, and that shapes who she becomes even after she escapes Springfield. These Lisa-centered episodes prove that intelligence without social support becomes isolation. Lisa is the most aware character in Springfield, which makes her the most consistently unhappy. She sees the town's flaws, her family's dysfunction, and the futility of trying to make things better. Her intelligence is a curse disguised as a gift, making her perpetually aware of problems she's too young and powerless to solve. And then there's Maggie, the baby who never speaks but somehow has the deepest lore of them all. Maggie's backstory proves that she's not just a background prop. she's been the family's secret guardian from day one. And Maggie Makes Three establishes why Maggie exists and what she represents in the family dynamic. The episode reveals that Homer and Marge didn't plan to have a third child. They were finally achieving financial stability with Bart in school and Lisa entering elementary. Homer was able to quit the power plant and work at his dream job at the bowling alley. The family was happy and moving forward for the first time in years. Then Marge got pregnant. The bowling alley's salary wasn't enough to support 3 children, so Homer had to beg Mr. Burns for his job back at the plant. Burns humiliated him during the rehiring process, making Homer literally grovel for a position he already proved he could do. Every day at work, Homer sees the sign he made that said, "Don't forget you're here forever," a reminder that he's trapped in misery with no escape. He covers parts of it with pictures of Maggie, transforming it into "Do It for Her." The show wants this to be touching, but it's actually devastating. Maggie represents the death of Homer's dreams and the permanent end of his happiness. He loves her, but she's also a living reminder that his life is over, and it will never get better. Every time Homer looks at those pictures, he's confronting the fact that he gave up everything for a baby he didn't plan to have. Maggie is both his motivation to keep going and the reason he's trapped. What makes Maggie really interesting is how competent she is despite being a baby. Throughout the series, Maggie saves the family multiple times through surprising skills and awareness. She's hyper-competent in ways that suggest she's far more intelligent than anyone realizes. The running gag is that adults constantly underestimate her because she can't speak. But Maggie is actually the most aware member of the Simpson family. Who Shot? Mr. Burns reveals Maggie as a secret action hero. The 2-part episode builds up to revealing who shot Mr. Burns after he tried to steal Springfield Elementary's oil well. The prime suspects are all adults with obvious motives: Homer, Barney, Smithers, Moe, Skinner, and others. But the big reveal is that Maggie shot him. Mr. Burns tried to take her lollipop, she grabbed his gun, and she shot him in self-defense. A baby successfully shot one of the most powerful men in Springfield, and nobody suspected her because she's just a baby. The really crazy part is that the police find gunpowder residue on Maggie's clothes, proving she fired the weapon. But they don't arrest her because she's too young to be criminally responsible. Maggie gets away with shooting Mr. Burns completely. The episode treats this as a joke, but think about what it means. Maggie was capable of understanding threat, accessing a weapon, and using it effectively at age 1. She's not a normal baby. Future episodes, where Lisa flashes back to Maggie speaking, show that Maggie can talk but chooses not to. In one flashback, adult Lisa remembers Maggie's first word being "daddy" during a crucial family moment. Maggie has been capable of speech for years, but remains silent. The implication is that she's learned more by observing while everyone assumes she doesn't understand. Her silence is strategic, not developmental. This makes Maggie the smartest Simpson. She's been collecting information about her family in Springfield for her entire life, while everyone treats her as window dressing. She knows everyone's secrets, has witnessed every family fight, and has observed every pattern. When she finally does start talking regularly, she'll have years of blackmail material on everyone. Maggie's recurring enemy relationship with Gerald the baby shows that even at 1-year-old, she's capable of sustained rivalry and strategic thinking. Gerald is another baby with one eyebrow who appears in multiple episodes as Maggie's nemesis. They exchange hostile looks, compete for dominance, and clearly understand their enemies. This suggests that babies in the Simpsons universe have far more awareness than adults give them credit for. The sequence in every opening credits where Maggie falls when Marge starts the car has become one of the show's most iconic running gags. But it also shows that Marge is so overwhelmed by family duties that she literally forgets to secure the baby properly. Maggie falls multiple times per week, and Marge never learns to double-check the car seat. This explains why Maggie is so tough and competent. She's had to survive parental negligence from birth. Maggie's surprising combat skills in various episodes suggest she's some kind of baby assassin. She's defeated mob bosses, fought off attackers, and protected her family from genuine threats. The episode where she fights off rioters while the family's trapped in the house shows Maggie wielding weapons with disturbing proficiency. For a baby to have tactical awareness and combat training is absurd, but the show plays it straight. Maggie is legitimately dangerous when motivated. The future episodes showing Maggie as an adult reveal she becomes either a famous rock star or a successful professional, depending on which timeline we're seeing. In every version of the future, Maggie is accomplished and respected. She breaks the family pattern of underachievement and actually fulfills her potential. This suggests that being the silent observer who wasn't pressured or pigeonholed the way Bart and Lisa were actually benefited her development. Maggie's character proves that there's power in being underestimated. Everyone assumes she's just a baby, so they don't guard their behavior or watch what they say around her. She's been absorbing information and developing skills while adults ignore her. When she finally emerges as a full person, she'll be the most prepared Simpson because she's been quietly learning from everyone else's mistakes. The "do it for her" photos covering Homer's sign represent the complexity of Maggie's role in the family. She's simultaneously the reason Homer is trapped and the reason he keeps going. She's both burden and motivation, both the end of his dreams and the beginning of new purpose. Homer didn't choose to have Maggie, but he chose to love her and work for her, even when it meant sacrificing everything else. These Maggie-centered episodes prove that she's not just a silent baby. She's a fully aware observer who has been cataloging Springfield's dysfunction since birth. Her silence is strategic, her competence is exceptional, and her future is probably the brightest of any Simpson. The baby who never speaks might actually have the most to say when she finally decides to start talking. Before I tell you about the extended Simpson family, subscribe to our channel. The extended Simpson family explains exactly why Homer and Marge are the way they are, because their parents were even more messed up. Understanding previous generations shows that the Simpsons' dysfunction goes back decades, with each generation passing trauma to the next while telling themselves they're doing better than their parents did. Grandpa Abe Simpson represents the failure of the greatest generation to provide emotional support to their children. Multiple flashback episodes show Abe as an inconsistent father who alternated between neglect and bizarre punishment. In some episodes, he's loving but incompetent. In others, he's actively cruel. The constant is that young Homer never knew which version of Abe he'd get on any given day, creating the anxious attachment style that defines adult Homer's relationships. The Curse of the Flying Hellfish reveals that Abe was actually a war hero with genuine bravery and camaraderie. The episode shows him in World War II as part of an elite unit that stole valuable art from a German castle. Abe and his unit, the Flying Hellfish, made a Tontine agreement that the last survivor would inherit the stolen paintings. When Mr. Burns starts murdering the other members to claim the art, Abe has to team up with Bart to stop him. What makes this episode important is that it shows Abe was capable of heroism, loyalty, and strategic thinking when he was young. He saved Montgomery Burns' life during the war, despite hating him. He formed genuine friendships with his unit members that lasted decades. Young Abe had qualities that could have made him a good father. But something happened between the war and Homer's childhood that broke him. Whether it was PTSD, alcoholism, or the death of Homer's mother, Abe transformed from competent soldier to neglectful parent. The episode also reveals that Abe chose family over fortune. When he finally retrieves the stolen paintings, which are worth millions, he returns them to their rightful owner rather than keeping them. Abe had the chance to give Homer and himself financial security, but he prioritized doing the ethical thing. This sacrifice meant Homer grew up in poverty, not because Abe was lazy, but because he had principles. Homer never learned this context, so he just remembers being poor and resents his father for it. Various flashback episodes show Abe's terrible parenting in more detail. In one episode, Abe uses baby Homer in commercials for Simpson & Son Revitalizing Tonic, essentially exploiting his infant son for money. In another, Abe takes Homer to a burlesque show when he's way too young to be there. Abe's idea of bonding was dragging Homer to age-inappropriate places and exposing him to things a child shouldn't witness. This explains Homer's own terrible parenting instincts. He's just repeating what Abe did because that's the only model he has. The episode where Abe almost has an affair with Bea, Jasper's girlfriend, shows that Abe was capable of emotional connection, but too selfish to maintain it properly. Bea genuinely loved Abe and wanted a life with him, but Abe was too set in his ways to commit. When Bea dies, Abe realizes he wasted his chance at happiness. This pattern of self-sabotage runs through the entire Simpson male line. Abe, Homer, and Bart all destroy their own chances at fulfillment through stubborn refusal to change. Grandpa's contradictory stories about his past show that he's an unreliable narrator whose version of history changes depending on his mood. In various episodes, Abe claims to have been a fighter pilot, an army cook, a tank commander, and half a dozen other roles during the war. He tells Homer he tried to murder him as a child. He claims to have known famous historical figures who died before he was born. Abe's memories are so unreliable that nobody can trust anything he says. This unreliability creates a family culture where history is negotiable. If Grandpa can invent new versions of his past whenever convenient, then everyone else can do the same. Homer's false memories and Bart's constant lying are just extensions of Abe's relationship with truth. The Simpson family doesn't have a coherent history because the patriarch keeps rewriting it. Marge's family reveals that the Bouvier are just as dysfunctional but in different ways. Patty and Selma Bouvier, Marge's twin sisters, have made hating Homer their entire personality. They've been hostile to him since before he and Marge got married, and their contempt has only intensified over 35 years. Every family gathering involves Patty and Selma making jokes about Homer's stupidity, weight, or career failure. They openly tell Marge she should leave him. What makes this interesting is that Patty and Selma aren't any more successful than Homer. Patty works at the DMV making people miserable, and Selma has been married and divorced multiple times. They're chain smokers with unfulfilling lives who have achieved nothing they're proud of. Their hatred of Homer isn't about him specifically. It's about their own disappointment with how their lives turned out. Mocking Homer is easier than confronting their own failures. Black Widower introduces Sideshow Bob's attempt to murder Selma, revealing just how desperate Selma is for love. She meets Bob in prison during a pen pal program and immediately falls for him, despite knowing he's a convicted criminal who tried to frame Krusty the Clown. Selma is so lonely that she's willing to marry a man who is obviously dangerous. Bob's plan to kill her for inheritance money is transparent to everyone except Selma, who wants love so badly she ignores every warning sign. Bart saves Selma's life by noticing that Bob's plan involved MacGyver, showing that even a 10-year-old could see through Bob's scheme. Selma survives but learns nothing from the experience. She continues making terrible romantic choices throughout the series, suggesting that her desperation for connection overrides her survival instincts. The Bouvier women's pattern is sacrificing themselves for men who don't deserve them, whether it's Marge staying with Homer or Selma nearly dying for Sideshow Bob. Jacqueline Bouvier, Marge's mother, embodies the previous generation's judgment and disappointment. She openly criticizes Marge's marriage choices and tells her that she could have done better than Homer. But Jacqueline's own marriage to Clancy Bouvier wasn't successful either. The episode Fear of Flying reveals that Clancy's career as a male flight attendant humiliated Jacqueline socially. She spent her marriage resenting her husband for not being masculine enough, according to 1960s standards. This creates a generational pattern where Bouvier women marry men they resent and then spend their lives being disappointed. Jacqueline resented Clancy. Marge resents Homer. Even Patty and Selma's various marriages follow this pattern of choosing poorly and staying bitter. The women in this family were taught that marriage requires sacrificing your own happiness for social respectability, and each generation repeats the mistake. Homer's half-brother Herb Powell shows what Homer could have been if raised differently. The episode, "O Brother, Where Art Thou?" reveals that Homer had a wealthy half-brother who was put up for adoption when Abe got a carnival worker pregnant. Herb was raised by a rich family, went to good schools, and became a successful car company CEO. He's everything. Homer isn't. Confident, accomplished, and financially secure. When Herb and Homer reunite, Herb immediately loves his brother and wants to help him. He gives Homer a job designing a car for the average American, trusting that Homer's working-class perspective will create something people actually want to buy. Homer designs the most hideous, expensive, impractical car ever conceived, bankrupting Herb's entire company in one decision. Herb loses everything and ends his relationship with Homer. Here's what makes this tragic. Herb didn't fail because he was incompetent. He failed because he trusted Homer and gave him too much creative control. If Herb had never met Homer, he'd still be rich and successful. But he wanted family connection so badly that he sacrificed business sense for brotherly love. Homer destroyed Herb's life through his own stupidity, not through malice. Herb learned the hard way that loving Homer means accepting that he'll eventually ruin everything he touches. The episode, Brother, Can You Spare? Two Dimes tries to redeem this storyline by having Herb invent a baby translator that makes him rich again. He forgives Homer and restores their relationship. But the damage is done. Herb now knows that trusting Homer is dangerous. Their relationship can never be equal because Homer will always be the liability and Herb will always be the one cleaning up after him. Selma's adoption of Ling in the episode Goo Goo Gai Pan shows that the Bouvier women can find happiness outside traditional family structures. When Selma realizes she'll never have a successful marriage, she decides to adopt a baby from China. The adoption process requires her to pretend to be married to Homer, which creates the usual complications. But Selma successfully becomes a mother and finds genuine fulfillment in raising Ling. This episode suggests that maybe the Bouvier women's problem isn't that they're incapable of love. It's that they keep trying to find love through romantic relationships with men instead of building families in non-traditional ways. Selma's happiness with Ling is more authentic than any of her marriages. She's not performing for a partner or sacrificing herself for approval. She's just being a mother to a daughter who needs her. Patty's coming out as lesbian in later seasons adds another layer to the Bouvier family dynamics. Her decades of hostility toward men and failed relationships suddenly make sense when she reveals she was never actually attracted to men in the first place. Patty spent years trying to force herself into heterosexual relationships because that's what was expected, and it made her miserable. Once she accepts her sexuality, she becomes slightly less bitter, though she still hates Homer on principle. The extended Simpson and Bouvier families prove that dysfunction is hereditary. Abe's terrible parenting created Homer's emotional problems. Jacqueline's bitter marriage model taught Marge to accept disappointment. Patty and Selma's loneliness reinforces that the Bouvier women are cursed to be unhappy. Each generation tells themselves they're breaking the cycle, but they're really just repeating it with minor variations. What makes this generational trauma interesting is that nobody in the family recognizes the patterns. Homer thinks he's nothing like Abe, even though he parents Bart the exact same way Abe parented him. Marge thinks she's nothing like Jacqueline, even though she's made identical compromises in her marriage. The family's inability to see their own patterns guarantees they'll keep repeating them. The extended family episodes establish that the Simpsons' dysfunction goes back at least 3 generations with no signs of improvement. Homer and Marge are actually doing marginally better than their parents did, which is both comforting and terrifying. If this is progress, imagine how bad things were before. The family's baseline for acceptable parenting is so low that Homer occasionally remembering his kids' names counts as a win. Now that we understand the family dynamics, let's look at where Homer spends most of his time avoiding them: work. Homer's work life at Springfield Nuclear Power Plant reveals something insane. He's genuinely good at his job when he actually tries, which makes his laziness even more frustrating. The plant has employed Homer for over 25 years, despite countless safety violations, multiple meltdowns, and his obvious incompetence during most working hours. The fact that he's never been fired permanently suggests that either the plant is desperate for employees or Homer has accidentally made himself indispensable. Homer Defined shows that Homer has accidentally saved the plant multiple times through pure luck rather than skill. The episode starts with Springfield Nuclear facing a total core meltdown that will cause a catastrophic explosion. The plant's safety team is frantically trying to prevent disaster, while Homer is eating donuts and ignoring the emergency. As the countdown approaches 0, Homer randomly pushes the T437 button using Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo to choose. The button prevents the meltdown, saving the plant and the entire town. What makes this absolutely crazy is that Homer's method for choosing which button to press was the same method he used during his initial job interview to guess answers. He got hired through random chance, and he saves the plant through random chance. Skill has nothing to do with it. The plant operates on the principle that infinite monkeys at infinite typewriters will eventually write Shakespeare, except in this case, it's one idiot at a control panel occasionally preventing nuclear disasters. The episode reveals that Homer becomes briefly famous as an industry hero after preventing the meltdown. Other power plants want him to give safety seminars. He gets awards and recognition. But then another crisis occurs, and everyone watches Homer use Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo again to choose his response. The industry immediately realizes Homer has no idea what he's doing, and his heroism was pure accident. His fame disappears as quickly as it arrived, and he goes back to being a nobody. This episode establishes a crucial pattern. Homer is capable of extraordinary competence in random moments, but it's never sustainable or intentional. He has occasional bursts of good decision-making that keep him employed, but they're surrounded by such consistent incompetence that nobody can trust him. The plant's continued operation despite Homer's presence is a miracle that defies logic. King-size Homer shows Homer's actual attitude toward work when he stops pretending to care. When Mr. Burns implements a workplace exercise program, Homer realizes that being disabled would allow him to work from home. He deliberately gains weight until he qualifies for disability status at 300 pounds. The plan works. Homer gets to work from home in his moo-moo, and he's actually more productive because he's comfortable. But then Homer's remote work setup fails during a crisis. He's unable to respond to an emergency because he's stuck at home. In a rare moment of genuine competence, Homer commandeers an ice cream truck and drives to the plant to manually prevent a meltdown. He wedges his enormous body into the nuclear vent to block toxic gas from escaping, sacrificing his own safety to save the town. Homer proves that he can be a hero when the situation absolutely demands it. What makes this episode really interesting is that it shows Homer understands his job well enough to know exactly what to do during emergencies. He's not actually incompetent, he's deliberately performing incompetence because doing the bare minimum has fewer consequences than exceeding expectations. Homer learned that trying hard just gets you more work without more pay, so he rationally chose to do as little as possible until crisis situations force him to reveal his actual abilities. Homer's enemy introduces Frank Grimes as a mirror, showing how absurd Homer's success actually is. Frank Grimes grew up in crushing poverty, worked multiple jobs while putting himself through college, and earned every achievement through merit. He's the American dream personified, hard work leading to success through determination. Then he gets assigned to work with Homer Simpson, and his entire worldview collapses. Grimes cannot comprehend how Homer has a family, a house, friends, and job security despite being completely incompetent. Homer didn't earn anything. He stumbled into good fortune through circumstances and privilege that had nothing to do with merit. Every time Grimes works hard, Homer gets credit through proximity. Every time Grimes follows safety protocols, Homer violates them without consequences. The system rewards Homer for existing, while Grimes struggles for every scrap of recognition. The episode builds to Grimes having a psychotic breakdown where he starts imitating Homer's behavior sarcastically. He ignores safety rules, acts childish, and mocks the idea that following proper procedure matters. Then he gets electrocuted and dies, while Homer sleeps through his own funeral. The message is devastatingly clear. The system protects Homer's incompetence and kills people like Frank Grimes who expect fairness. What makes this episode so controversial is that it's right. Homer shouldn't have his life. He didn't earn it, and he doesn't maintain it properly. But he was born into circumstances that protected him from consequences. He's white, male, and has family connections. Mr. Burns doesn't know his name, but also doesn't fire him because replacing someone requires effort. Homer coasts on privilege while harder working people suffer, and the show is brutally honest about this dynamic. The fact that Homer learns nothing from Grimes's death shows how insulated he is from reality. A man died because Homer's incompetence created a toxic work environment, and Homer's main concern is that Grimes didn't like him. No self-reflection, no growth, no change in behavior. Homer will continue being incompetent because the system will continue protecting him regardless of who gets hurt. Lenny and Carl represent Homer's work friendships and show that even his positive relationships are shallow. Homer drinks with these guys every day after work. They've been friends for decades. But Homer constantly confuses which one is Lenny and which is Carl. He doesn't know Carl's last name. He forgets they exist whenever he's not actively spending time with them. They're drinking buddies, not actual friends, and Homer's inability to remember basic facts about them proves he doesn't really care who they are as people. What's interesting is that Lenny and Carl are both more competent workers than Homer. They know their jobs, follow safety procedures, and actually contribute to the plant's operation. But they're paid the same as Homer and have the same lack of advancement opportunities. This shows that competence doesn't matter at Springfield Nuclear. Everyone is equally replaceable regardless of merit. The only person who advances is Smithers, who does it through kissing Burns's ass rather than through technical skill. The plant's various safety violations and meltdowns throughout the series show that Springfield Nuclear should have been shut down decades ago. Burns operates the facility with minimal safety standards, cutting corners to maximize profit. Multiple episodes feature catastrophic failures that should have killed everyone in Springfield. The plant's cooling towers glow ominously. Toxic waste gets dumped directly into the lake. The control room has exposed wiring and ancient equipment. The fact that the plant keeps operating despite being an obvious death trap reveals how regulatory capture works. Burns probably bribes city officials and inspectors to overlook violations. The town is economically dependent on the plant, so nobody wants to shut it down and lose all those jobs. Springfield Nuclear exists in a state of institutionalized negligence where everyone knows it's dangerous but nobody has the power or will to fix it. Homer's various job changes throughout the series show that he's actually capable of doing other work when circumstances force it. He's been a snowplow driver, bowling alley worker, astronaut, truck driver, bodyguard, and dozens of other jobs during brief periods when he quit or got fired from the plant. In almost every case, Homer is either good at the new job or at least competent enough to not get immediately fired. This proves his incompetence at the plant is a choice rather than inability. The astronaut episode shows Homer at his most accidentally competent. NASA needs an average American to go to space for PR purposes, and Homer's profile is literally average in every measurable way. He gets sent to space with zero training and immediately causes problems by smuggling potato chips that clog instruments. But then Homer accidentally fixes a critical system failure by using a carbon rod as a makeshift hammer. He's a terrible astronaut who saves the mission through luck. This pattern repeats constantly. Homer is terrible at everything until the moment when being terrible would have serious consequences. Then he's suddenly competent enough to fix the problem he probably caused. It's like he has a supernatural ability to fail upward, where his mistakes create crises that his occasional competence then resolves. The universe seems designed to protect Homer from the consequences of his own actions. Mr. Burns' relationship with Homer shows the ultimate power imbalance. Burns doesn't know Homer's name despite Homer working at the plant for over 25 years. Every interaction begins with Burns saying, "Who the devil are you?" or calling him by wrong names like Simpson, eh? Burns literally cannot distinguish Homer from any other employee because workers are fungible units to him. Homer's individual existence doesn't register to Burns beyond being a vaguely familiar annoyance, but Burns also can't fire Homer permanently because replacing him would require Burns to pay attention to the hiring process, It's easier to keep Homer than to train someone new. This creates job security through irrelevance. Homer is too insignificant to bother firing, but also too established to easily replace. He's achieved perfect mediocrity, bad enough to not get promoted, not bad enough to get fired. These work episodes establish that Homer's career is sustained by systemic dysfunction rather than personal merit. Springfield Nuclear operates on the principle that consistency matters more than competence. Homer shows up most days and occasionally prevents disasters when backed into a corner. That's apparently enough to maintain employment in a system where actually caring about your job makes you a target for additional responsibilities without additional pay. Homer's work life proves that the American economic system rewards people for showing up and being white more than it rewards talent or effort. Frank Grimes died for this truth. Everyone else just accepts it and moves on. Homer's terrible at work but somehow maintains his marriage. Let's look at how the Simpson family actually functions behind closed doors. Homer's terrible at work but somehow maintains his marriage. Let's look at how the Simpson family actually functions behind closed doors. Homer and Marge's marriage reveals something shocking. It works because Marge has incredibly low expectations, and Homer occasionally exceeds them. Their relationship survives not through mutual respect or genuine partnership, but through Marge's willingness to accept disappointment as the baseline. Every time Homer does something marginally thoughtful, like remembering an anniversary or not strangling Bart for a whole week, Marge treats it as a victory. The bar is so low that Homer trips over it constantly, but still manages to clear it often enough to keep the marriage intact. The Last Temptation of Homer puts this dynamic to the test when Homer meets Mindy Simmons, a new coworker who is basically his female equivalent. She loves donuts, watches TV obsessively, and thinks on the exact same wavelength as Homer. Their compatibility is instant and obvious. For the first time in his adult life, Homer connects with someone who actually understands him without needing translation. They finish each other's sentences, share the same terrible taste, and enjoy the same mindless activities. Mindy is everything Homer didn't know he wanted in a partner. The episode builds to Homer and Mindy going to a power plant convention where they share a hotel room. Homer is genuinely torn between his marriage vows and his attraction to someone who gets him. He calls Marge and asks her to give him a reason not to cheat. Marge's response is heartbreakingly simple. She tells him she doesn't know what to say except that she's always loved him and trusts him to do the right thing. She doesn't guilt him or threaten him. She just expresses faith in his character despite knowing his flaws. Homer chooses Marge, but here's what makes this complicated. Homer didn't choose Marge because their relationship is fulfilling or because she's his soulmate. He chose her because leaving would make him the bad guy, and Homer's entire identity is built around being basically good despite being stupid. If Homer cheated, he'd have to see himself as a villain, and he's psychologically incapable of that level of self-awareness. He stays faithful not because he doesn't want Mindy, but because the guilt would destroy the delusion he maintains about himself. The episode ends with Homer and Marge reuniting, while Mindy disappears from the show completely. We never find out what happened to her or whether Homer ever thinks about what he gave up. The show treats this as romantic proof that Homer loves Marge, but it's actually evidence that Homer is trapped by his own limitations. He can't imagine a different life, so he defaults to the one he has. Colonel Homer explores the same temptation from a different angle when Lurleen Lumpkin, a country singer, openly pursues Homer while he's managing her career. Lurleen writes a song called Bagged Me a Homer that makes her feelings completely explicit. She's not subtle about wanting to steal him from Marge, but Homer is so oblivious to romantic signals that he genuinely doesn't realize Lurleen is hitting on him until Marge spells it out in concrete terms. What makes this episode interesting is that Homer's stupidity protects his marriage. A smarter man would have recognized Lurleen's attraction and either pursued it or shut it down immediately. Homer does neither because he literally doesn't understand what's happening until it's too late. His incompetence in reading social cues becomes a weird form of fidelity. He can't cheat if he doesn't realize cheating is an option. When Homer finally understands the situation, he immediately quits managing Lurleen and goes home to Marge. Again, the show plays this as romantic, but it's really just Homer avoiding complexity. Managing a country singer's career would require effort and emotional intelligence. Staying married to Marge requires only showing up and occasionally not being terrible. Homer chooses the path of least resistance, which happens to be staying married. Life on the fast lane shows the other side of the marriage when Marge is the one tempted to leave. Homer forgets their anniversary and gives Marge a bowling ball with his name engraved on it, a gift that's obviously for himself. Marge is so hurt by this thoughtlessness that she decides to learn bowling, specifically to spite Homer. At the bowling alley, she meets Jacques, a French instructor who treats her like an intelligent, desirable woman instead of an unpaid housekeeper. Jacques represents everything Homer isn't. He's cultured, attentive, romantic, and genuinely interested in Marge as a person. Their lessons become increasingly intimate as Jacques slowly seduces her with the simple act of paying attention. He asks about her thoughts, compliments her skill, and makes her feel valued for the first time in years. Marge blooms under this attention, becoming more confident and assertive. The crucial moment comes when Jacques invites Marge to his apartment and she actually drives there. She doesn't immediately reject him. She considers it seriously, driving all the way to his building and parking outside. In her mind, she replays her life with Homer, the disappointments, the thoughtlessness, the constant feeling of being taken for granted. Then she remembers their wedding day and how happy she was, choosing Homer, despite knowing his limitations. Marge drives to the power plant instead and tells Homer she chooses him. The episode wants us to see this as proof of love, but watch Marge's face during the scene. She doesn't look happy, she looks resigned. This isn't Marge choosing Homer because she loves him more than Jacques. This is Marge choosing Homer because leaving would mean admitting she wasted 20 years on the wrong person, and that truth is too painful to confront. Think about what Marge gave up in that moment. Jacques offered her a chance to be with someone who valued her intelligence and treated her as an equal. Homer offers her a lifetime of forgotten anniversaries and thoughtless gifts. Marge chose familiarity over happiness because starting over at her age felt impossible. That's not romance, that's surrender. The really heartbreaking part is that Jacques disappears completely after this episode. We never see him again. Marge had one chance to escape her suffocating marriage, and she let it go, and the show never acknowledges what that cost her. Every time Marge is frustrated with Homer in future episodes, viewers who remember this episode can imagine her thinking about Jacques and wondering what her life could have been. Homer's phobia about Marge leaving him manifests in multiple episodes where he becomes paranoid about her having affairs. In The Last Temptation of Marge, Homer hallucinates that Marge is cheating with a neighbor. His insecurity isn't based on anything Marge has done. It's based on Homer's unconscious awareness that he's not good enough for her, and eventually she'll figure that out. His brain knows what his heart refuses to accept. Marge settling for him is an act of charity that could end at any moment. Marriage counseling episodes show that their problems are systemic rather than situational. When they see therapists, the core issue is always the same. Homer is selfish and childish, while Marge enables him and then resents the burden. The therapists suggest communication, boundary setting, and mutual respect. Homer and Marge nod along, agree to try harder, and then immediately return to their established patterns. Change would require actual work, and both of them are too exhausted to put in that effort. What makes their marriage work is mutual incompleteness. Marge needs someone to take care of because managing other people's lives lets her avoid examining her own. Homer needs someone to mother him because he never developed emotional independence. They're codependent in ways that look like love, but are actually about filling psychological voids created by childhood trauma. Neither could survive alone, so they cling to each other despite being fundamentally incompatible. The TV antenna signal on the porch shows how their marriage actually functions day to day. When Homer wants to have sex, he turns on the porch light. When Marge is willing, she leaves the antenna up. They've reduced intimacy to a signaling system that requires no actual communication. This is presented as quirky and romantic, but it's actually sad. After decades of marriage, they still can't talk about physical intimacy like adults. Their anniversary episodes reveal how differently they remember their relationship. Homer remembers big gestures and dramatic moments. Marge remembers quiet acts of consideration that Homer has since forgotten. They're living in parallel versions of their marriage where Homer thinks he's a good husband because he occasionally does something nice, while Marge thinks she's a good wife because she constantly sacrifices her own needs. Neither version is accurate. The Simpsons movie puts the ultimate strain on their marriage when Homer's stupidity directly endangers the entire town. He dumps a silo of pig waste into Lake Springfield, causing an environmental crisis that forces the government to put a dome over the town. Marge has to evacuate with the kids, while Homer deals with the consequences of his actions. For the first time, being married to Homer has literal life or death stakes. Marge records a video message telling Homer goodbye. She says she's always defended him and believed in him, but this time he went too far. She's taking the kids and leaving, and she's not sure she wants him to follow. This is Marge's breaking point, the moment where she finally admits that loving Homer isn't enough to compensate for the damage he causes. She's choosing her children's safety over her marriage, but then Homer saves Springfield by climbing the dome and throwing a bomb that destroys it. His moment of redemption convinces Marge to take him back. The movie ends with the family reunited and happy. But nothing fundamental has changed. Homer is still the same selfish idiot. Marge is still the same enabling martyr. They're just continuing the cycle for another day because that's what they've always done. Homer and Marge's marriage survives because both of them have decided that staying together is easier than facing the consequences of separation. Divorce would mean splitting assets they don't have, explaining to the kids why they failed, and confronting the fact that they wasted their adult lives on each other. It's simpler to keep pretending that love conquers all, even when everyone can see it doesn't. The tragic beauty of their relationship is that it's built on genuine moments of connection buried under mountains of disappointment. Homer really does love Marge in his limited, childish way. Marge really does love Homer, despite understanding his flaws completely. But love isn't enough when one person refuses to grow and the other refuses to demand growth. Their marriage is a slow-motion tragedy disguised as sitcom stability. While Homer and Marge barely hold it together, their kids have their own complicated relationships that define the family. Bart and Lisa's sibling dynamic reveals that loving someone doesn't mean liking them, and that family bonds can survive constant conflict because underneath the fighting, they're each other's only true allies. The rivalry between them starts early and never really ends, but it's more complicated than simple jealousy. They represent opposite approaches to life. Bart rejects authority and embraces chaos, while Lisa desperately seeks approval and craves order. They're natural enemies who happen to share DNA. Lisa's first word shows where it all began. The flashback reveals that Bart was getting all the attention as an only child until Lisa was born. When baby Lisa arrived, suddenly everyone cared about the new baby, and Bart became an afterthought. Bart's jealousy was immediate and intense. He tried to mail Lisa back to the hospital, destroyed her baby photos, and generally did everything possible to make her disappear. Young Bart wasn't being cruel for cruelty's sake. He was a toddler who didn't understand why he was being replaced. But then Lisa's first word was Bart, said with pure love and admiration. She looked at her brother like he was the most important person in the world. That moment changed everything. Bart realized that despite everything he'd done to get rid of her, Lisa loved him unconditionally. She saw him as her protector and hero. Bart couldn't hate someone who worshipped him like that. This flashback explains why their adult relationship is so contradictory. Lisa still sees glimpses of the brother she idolized, the one who occasionally protects her and shows unexpected kindness. Bart still remembers that Lisa chose to love him when she had no reason to. They fight constantly because they're fundamentally different people, but they protect each other when outsiders threaten because that original bond never completely broke. Bart vs. Thanksgiving demonstrates their deepest conflict and most genuine reconciliation. The episode starts with Lisa spending days creating an elaborate Thanksgiving centerpiece for the family dinner. It's a perfect metaphor for Lisa's approach to life. Carefully planned, artistically executed, designed to impress adults. She's proud of it and expects everyone to appreciate the work she put in. Bart destroys it in seconds. He's not trying to hurt Lisa. He's just being careless while playing, and the centerpiece gets caught in the crossfire. But the damage is done. Lisa watches her hard work get destroyed and starts crying. Bart laughs it off because acknowledging the harm would require emotional vulnerability he doesn't have. Their fight escalates until Bart gets sent to his room without Thanksgiving dinner. The genius of this episode is that neither kid is entirely wrong. Lisa has a right to be upset that her work was destroyed. Bart has a right to be frustrated that Lisa's project was so fragile and important that he couldn't move freely in his own house, but both are too proud to apologize or compromise. Bart runs away rather than admit he hurt his sister. Lisa refuses to accept a half-hearted apology rather than extend forgiveness. Bart's time on the roof, thinking about his family eating Thanksgiving dinner without him, forces him to confront whether being right is worth being alone. He sees homeless people sharing a meal together and realizes that family connection matters more than pride. Bart climbs back down and gives Lisa a genuine apology, admitting he was wrong to destroy her centerpiece and wrong to laugh about it. Lisa forgives him immediately because that's what she wanted all along, acknowledgement that her feelings mattered. This episode establishes the pattern for all their future conflicts. They hurt each other, dig in stubbornly, and eventually reconcile when circumstances force them to remember their family. Neither changes their fundamental personality. Bart will keep being careless. Lisa will keep being sensitive. But they've learned they can survive their differences because the bond between them is stronger than their individual grievances. Brothers Little Helper shows how their dynamic shifts when Bart's behavior gets medicalized. When Bart is put on Focusine for attention issues, the drug completely changes his personality. He becomes calm, focused, and cooperative. For the first time in their lives, Bart isn't causing problems or needing constant supervision. Lisa should be happy about this. She's always wanted Bart to be more responsible. But Lisa hates medicated Bart. This obedient, quiet version of her brother feels wrong. She misses the chaotic troublemaker who annoyed her constantly, because that's who Bart actually is. When Bart starts experiencing psychotic side effects and steals a tank, Lisa's the one who helps him. She doesn't turn him in or try to manage him. She accepts that Bart's authentic self includes mental health struggles, and she'd rather have the real Bart with all his problems than a chemically altered version who fits society's expectations. This episode reveals that Lisa's frustration with Bart isn't about wanting him to be different. It's about wanting him to reach his potential. She knows Bart is smart and capable. Watching him waste his abilities through laziness and rebellion frustrates her because she can see what he could be. But when the medication proved that changing Bart's fundamental nature wasn't the answer, Lisa defended the brother she knows over the ideal version adults wanted to create. Bart the mother demonstrates that Bart has protective instincts Lisa can rely on when it really matters. When Bart accidentally kills a bird and decides to hatch its eggs, Lisa is skeptical. She's watched Bart start and abandon projects for years. She assumes this will be another case of Bart getting bored and giving up. But Bart surprises her by following through, successfully hatching the eggs and protecting the baby lizards, even when the entire town wants them destroyed. Lisa respects Bart more after this incident because he proved he's capable of sustained responsibility when emotionally invested. This doesn't make Bart suddenly mature or reliable in all areas, but it shows Lisa that her brother has depths she sometimes forgets about. Bart isn't just the troublemaker. He's also capable of genuine empathy and commitment when something matters to him personally. The episode also shows Bart protecting Lisa from bullies and social threats throughout the series. When other kids mock Lisa for being smart or playing saxophone, Bart steps in. He doesn't understand why Lisa cares about those things, but he doesn't need to understand to defend her. Family loyalty overrides their personal disagreements. Bart might torment Lisa at home, but nobody else is allowed to hurt her. Lisa, in return, always sides with Bart against authority figures, even when she thinks he's wrong. When Principal Skinner or Mrs. Crabapple blame Bart for something, Lisa will defend him, or at least refuse to testify against him. She recognizes that the system is stacked against kids like Bart who don't fit the mold. Her intelligence and compliance give her privilege, and she uses that privilege to protect her brother whenever possible. Their future as adults in various flash-forward episodes shows them maintaining contact and genuine affection despite living very different lives. In timelines where Lisa becomes president, Bart is supportive even though he doesn't understand politics. In timelines where Bart becomes successful, Lisa is proud even though his success came through unconventional means. They grew into adults who respect each other's choices without needing to agree with them. The sibling dynamic between Lisa and Maggie is simpler but equally important. Lisa treats Maggie like a confidant and younger sister who needs protection. When Maggie is in danger or struggling, Lisa immediately steps in. She changes Maggie's diapers when Marge is overwhelmed, plays with her when everyone else forgets she exists, and generally acts as a secondary parent despite being only 8 years old herself. This dynamic shows Lisa's natural caretaking instincts and also reveals how much responsibility she's been given in the family. Lisa parents Maggie the way Marge should be parenting both of them. She's taken on emotional labor that shouldn't belong to a child, and she does it without complaint because nobody else will. Lisa's relationship with Maggie is the healthiest in the family because it's not built on resentment or obligation. Lisa genuinely loves her baby sister and wants to help her. Maggie's relationship with Bart is more distant. Bart knows Maggie exists but doesn't interact with her much beyond practical necessity. He'll grab her when the family needs to evacuate or include her in activities when forced to babysit, but he doesn't seek out her company. This isn't cruelty. Bart just doesn't know what to do with a baby who can't talk or play at his level. Their relationship will probably develop more as Maggie gets older and can participate in activities Bart enjoys. The three Simpson kids represent three different responses to growing up in dysfunction. Bart embraced rebellion and stopped trying to meet expectations. Lisa overcompensated by pursuing perfection and pleasing authority. Maggie observed everything while being overlooked, learning from her siblings' mistakes without making her own yet. Each coping strategy makes sense given their birth order and personality, but none of them developed healthy emotional processing because their parents were too broken to teach them. The sibling episodes prove that the Simpson kids love each other despite constant fighting. They're bound together by shared trauma and mutual protection against a world that doesn't understand them. Bart and Lisa fight because they're opposites who see each other's flaws clearly, but they die for each other if necessary. That combination of conflict and loyalty defines sibling relationships more accurately than most family sitcoms dare to portray. The Simpson family's dysfunction looks almost normal compared to their neighbor, who seems perfect on the surface but hides his own darkness, Ned Flanders. Ned Flanders' backstory reveals something disturbing. His obsessive niceness isn't faith, it's psychological conditioning from childhood trauma that created a pressure cooker personality ready to explode. The whole neighborhood sees Ned as the perfect Christian family man who never gets angry and always helps others. But Hurricane Nettie tears away that facade and shows the broken person underneath. The episode starts when a hurricane destroys Ned's house completely. The community comes together to rebuild it in a Habitat for Humanity style effort. Everyone contributes, but nobody actually knows what they're doing. Homer hammers nails into his own hand. Bart and Lisa create more problems than they solve. The rebuilt house is structurally unsound and aesthetically terrible. When Ned tries to thank everyone, a doorbell falls off in his hand, and he snaps completely. Ned's breakdown is spectacular. He starts screaming at his neighbors, calling out everyone's flaws with brutal accuracy. He tells Homer he's the worst human being he's ever met. He tells Reverend Lovejoy that his sermons are boring and he never provides real spiritual guidance. He tells Marge that her family is a circus of incompetence. Decades of repressed rage come pouring out in one cathartic explosion of honesty. The police take Ned to the mental hospital where his childhood trauma gets revealed. Flashback shows that Ned's parents were beatnik hippies who refused to discipline him at all. Young Ned was a terror who destroyed everything and attacked people randomly. His parents couldn't control him, so they sent him to the University of Minnesota Spankological Protocol Facility, where Dr. Foster invented a treatment involving aggressive spanking combined with behavioral conditioning. Here's where it gets really dark. Dr. Foster didn't cure Ned's behavioral problems. He traumatized Ned into suppressing all negative emotions and hostile impulses. The spanking therapy was so intense that 8-year-old Ned learned to repress everything that might trigger punishment. His niceness isn't natural. It's a defense mechanism created by childhood abuse disguised as treatment. Every time Ned says "okily dokily" or helps a neighbor who doesn't deserve it, he's performing a script burned into his brain by years of conditioning. The episode reveals that Ned has been on the edge of breakdown for his entire adult life. The pressure of maintaining his perfect persona while actual rage and frustration builds underneath has created someone fundamentally unstable. He can't express anger, so it accumulates until something triggers a massive release. Then he goes back to repression because that's the only coping mechanism he has. What makes this tragic is that Ned's faith is real, even though his niceness is performance. He genuinely believes in God and Christian values, but his ability to express that faith is distorted by trauma. He can't separate authentic belief from conditioned behavior. His children are being raised by someone who looks perfect, but is actually psychologically damaged in ways that will probably damage them too. Alone again, Natra Diddley delivers another devastating blow to Ned's stability when Ned Flanders dies in the stupidest way possible. The Simpson family attends a NASCAR race where Homer wins a contest and gets to shoot T-shirts into the crowd with a cannon. Homer aims at Maud, but she bends down to pick up her purse. The T-shirt sails past her and flies into the stands, where it hits Dr. Hibbert. The ricochet sends the shirt back toward Maud, who stands up at the exact wrong moment and gets knocked over the edge of the stands, falling to her death. Maud dies because Homer was careless with a T-shirt cannon. That's it. No noble sacrifice, no meaningful death, just absurd bad luck caused by Homer's incompetence. Ned has to process that his wife, the mother of his children, died because his stupid neighbor couldn't aim properly, and he can't even get angry about it because his conditioning won't allow him to express rage at Homer. The episode shows Ned trying to maintain his faith and positivity while dealing with genuine grief. He tells his children that their mother is in heaven and they'll see her again someday. He refuses to blame Homer or God for what happened. He tries to move forward by being even more religious and even more helpful to others, but you can see the cracks forming. Every time Ned interacts with Homer after Maud's death, there's a moment where rage flickers across his face before he suppresses it. Ned's dating life after Maud's death shows how desperate he is for companionship and how broken his ability to form healthy relationships has become. He dates multiple women throughout the series, but none of them understand the complexity of being with someone who can't express negative emotions. They think Ned's niceness is charming until they realize he's literally incapable of disagreement or confrontation. That gets creepy fast. His relationship with Edna Krabappel in later seasons represents Ned trying to move on from Maud. Edna is everything Maud wasn't. Cynical, jaded, experienced with disappointment. She's been married multiple times and has realistic expectations about men. When she and Ned start dating, everyone is skeptical because they seem incompatible. But Edna appreciates Ned's genuine kindness after dating so many selfish men, and Ned appreciates that Edna doesn't expect him to be perfect. The Nedna relationship works because Edna has enough emotional intelligence to recognize that Ned's niceness comes from trauma. She doesn't push him to express anger or break his conditioning. She just accepts him as he is while providing the cynical balance he needs. When Edna dies, in real life because her voice actress passed away, the show wrote her character out by having her die off screen. Ned loses another wife, cementing his role as Springfield's most tragic figure. Ned's children, Rod and Todd Flanders, are being raised in the same repressive environment that damaged their father. They're so sheltered that they don't know what dice are because they might promote gambling. They're not allowed to watch most TV, listen to popular music, or associate with kids who aren't also strictly religious. Ned is accidentally recreating the conditions that traumatized him, just with religious fervor instead of hippie permissiveness. The episode where social services almost takes the Simpson kids and gives them to Ned shows what would happen if Ned's parenting style became law. Homer and Marge are neglectful in ways that put their children at risk. But Ned's alternative is suffocating religious control that would crush the kids' spirits just as effectively. The episode ultimately sides with messy freedom over orderly oppression, suggesting that imperfect love beats perfect control. Ned's financial situation is mysteriously stable, despite owning a store that seems to have no customers. The Leftorium sells left-handed products exclusively, which is such a niche market that it shouldn't be profitable. Multiple episodes show the store empty or barely functioning. Yet Ned maintains a nice house, supports his family comfortably, and has money for charity. The implication is either that Ned has independent wealth from inheritance, or that divine providence literally provides for him financially. The show never explains it clearly. His relationship with Reverend Lovejoy shows the limitations of Springfield's religious community. Ned calls Lovejoy constantly with minor questions and concerns about sin. He needs spiritual guidance to navigate daily life because his conditioning makes him unsure about everything that isn't explicitly covered by biblical rules. Lovejoy finds Ned exhausting and unhelpful, treating him like a nuisance rather than a devoted congregation member who needs support. This dynamic reveals that Springfield's Christian community is performative rather than genuine. They attend church and claim faith, but they don't actually care about helping each other or living according to Christian values. Ned is the only person who takes it seriously, and that makes him a weirdo rather than a role model. His genuine faith exposes everyone else's hypocrisy. Ned's periodic breakdowns throughout the series show that the conditioning never fully holds. Whenever he experiences significant stress or loss, the repressed rage surfaces, and Ned becomes temporarily honest about his feelings. Then he immediately feels guilty about expressing anger and doubles down on niceness to compensate. It's a cycle that can't end well because the underlying trauma was never actually addressed or healed. The episode where Ned has a hidden rage room in his basement shows one coping mechanism he's developed. When anger builds up, he goes downstairs and destroys things in private where nobody can witness his loss of control. This is healthier than complete repression, but it's still dysfunction. Ned can't express anger in healthy ways to the people who deserve it. He has to hide his emotions and release them on inanimate objects in secret. Ned's story proves that extreme goodness can be as unhealthy as extreme badness when it comes from trauma rather than genuine character. His repression created a pressure cooker that occasionally explodes, revealing the angry person he's suppressing. Ned isn't actually nice. He's scared of what will happen if he's honest about his feelings, and that fear makes him perform niceness even when kindness isn't appropriate. The tragedy is that Ned could have been genuinely good if his childhood hadn't taught him to repress everything. He has the capacity for kindness and the desire to help others, but the conditioning warped those positive traits into something compulsive and unhealthy. Ned helps people not because he wants to, but because he's psychologically incapable of refusing. That's not virtue. That's dysfunction. Springfield's relationship with religion through Ned shows that faith can be sincere while still being distorted by trauma. Ned genuinely believes in God and tries to live according to Christian principles. But his understanding of those principles is filtered through psychological damage that makes him unable to distinguish between authentic faith and conditioned responses. His religion is real and broken at the same time. While Ned represents religious extremism born from trauma, another Springfield resident represents pure evil without any excuse, Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns's backstory proves he's legitimately evil, not just rich, and the scary part is that Springfield lets him get away with everything because he controls their jobs and their economy. Charles Montgomery Burns has been alive for over a century according to various episodes, surviving multiple wars, economic crashes, and assassination attempts through a combination of wealth, cruelty, and supernatural stubbornness. He's so old that his memories span from the late 1800s to the present, and every era reveals him being terrible in age-appropriate ways. Rosebud shows Burns's Citizen Kane origin story and proves that he's been emotionally damaged since childhood. The episode reveals that young Monty was sent to a harsh boarding school where he was forced to abandon his beloved teddy bear, Bobo. That moment of separation from the one thing he loved created the heartless businessman who would spend his life accumulating wealth and power to fill the void left by losing childhood innocence. Burns became a monster because he never processed the trauma of being forced to grow up too quickly. But here's the thing, Burns had choices. Plenty of people experience childhood trauma without becoming corporate villains who endanger entire towns for profit. Burns chose to use his pain as justification for hurting others. When he finally reunites with Bobo after Maggie Simpson finds the bear, Burns has a brief moment of vulnerability where he could choose change. Instead, he just hugs the bear, feels satisfied, and goes back to being evil. The capacity for redemption exists, but Burns rejects it because being cruel serves his interests. The Curse of the Flying Hellfish reveals Burns's World War II service and shows he's been a backstabbing betrayer since the 1940s. The episode flashes back to Burns and Abe Simpson serving in the same unit, the Flying Hellfish. After stealing valuable paintings from a German castle, the unit creates a tontine where the last surviving member inherits everything. Burns systematically murders the other members over the decades to claim the fortune for himself, showing that he's willing to kill people he fought beside just for money. What makes this particularly dark is that Abe saved Burns's life during the war. Burns would have died if Abe hadn't rescued him from enemy fire, but Burns has no loyalty or gratitude. The moment Abe is the only obstacle between Burns and the paintings, Burns tries to murder him without hesitation. This establishes that Burns is fundamentally incapable of human connection or obligation. Every relationship is transactional, and the moment someone stops being useful, they become expendable. Burns's relationship with Waylon Smithers shows the closest thing he has to genuine affection, and it's still deeply dysfunctional. Smithers is obsessively devoted to Burns, doing everything from managing the nuclear plant to helping Burns bathe. His loyalty goes beyond professional obligation into romantic obsession. Smithers is clearly in love with Burns, and various episodes confirm his sexuality and his specific fixation on his boss. Burns, meanwhile, treats Smithers like a particularly useful servant. He doesn't return Smithers' affection or even acknowledge it most of the time. When Burns does show appreciation, it's always couched in terms of Smithers' usefulness rather than genuine fondness. Burns keeps Smithers around because he's competent and loyal, not because he cares about him as a person. It's the most one-sided relationship in the show, and Smithers seems content with the scraps of attention Burns occasionally throws his way. The episode where Smithers temporarily replaces Burns as power plant manager reveals how much Burns needs Smithers' competence. Burns falls apart without someone managing the details of his life. He forgets to eat, can't remember how basic appliances work, and generally proves he's too old and disconnected to function independently. But instead of showing gratitude when Smithers returns, Burns just goes back to treating him badly. The dependence is real, but unacknowledged. Burns's various schemes to increase profits at the expense of public safety show his complete disregard for human life. He blocks out the sun to force people to use more electricity. He steals oil from beneath Springfield Elementary. He releases radioactive waste into the environment. He runs the nuclear plant with minimal safety standards, leading to near meltdowns regularly. Every decision Burns makes prioritizes profit over people, and he faces no meaningful consequences because he owns the town economically. The episode where Burns gets shot reveals that practically everyone in Springfield has a motive to murder him. When police investigate, they find that Burns has personally wronged almost every citizen. He's cheated workers, polluted the environment, stolen from children, abused animals, and generally made life worse for everyone around him. The real mystery isn't who shot Burns. It's how Burns survived this long without being murdered sooner. The reveal that Maggie Simpson shot Burns is perfect because it shows that even a baby recognizes him as a threat. Burns tried to steal Maggie's lollipop, and she instinctively grabbed his gun and shot him in self-defense. A 1-year-old successfully defended herself against one of Springfield's most powerful men, and Burns was so weakened by age that a baby's attack nearly killed him. The mighty Mr. Burns brought down by an infant is poetic justice. Burns's health is a running joke that illustrates his defiance of natural death. Dr. Hibbert explains that Burns has every disease known to medicine, but they're all in perfect balance. The diseases crowd each other out and prevent any single condition from killing him. Burns is literally too sick to die, which becomes a metaphor for how systemic corruption survives through complexity. He should have died decades ago, but the system protecting him is so convoluted that individual failures can't bring down the whole structure. His age varies wildly depending on the episode's needs, but the consistent theme is that Burns is absurdly old. He remembers the Spanish-American War, the invention of automobiles, Prohibition, and multiple other historical events spanning over a century. Various episodes suggest he's anywhere from 81 to over 120 years old. The exact number doesn't matter. What matters is that Burns has lived long enough to accumulate grotesque amounts of wealth and power that he uses entirely for selfish purposes. Burns's various Nazi connections throughout the series hint that his fortune includes money stolen during World War II. Multiple episodes reference Burns having worked with or profited from fascist regimes. This isn't played for laughs. It's a genuine suggestion that Burns's wealth is built on the worst crimes of the 20th century. He didn't earn his fortune through innovation or hard work. He stole it from victims of war and genocide. His obsession with releasing the hounds reveals Burns's comfort with violence as a solution to annoyance. Whenever someone bothers him, Burns's first instinct is to unleash attack dogs. This isn't just a running gag. It shows that Burns sees violence as a legitimate response to minor irritations. He would rather maul trespassers than ask them to leave. The hounds represent Burns's fundamental belief that might makes right and that wealthy people are entitled to hurt anyone who disrespects them. Burns's inability to remember Homer's name after 25 years of employment shows his contempt for workers. Every interaction starts with Burns asking, "Who the devil are you?" or calling Homer by the wrong name. Burns literally cannot distinguish individual workers because they're fungible units to him. Homer's personal existence doesn't register because acknowledging workers as people would require caring about their welfare, and that would cut into profits. The episode where Burns tries to build a casino and deliberately designs it to be addictive and exploitative shows his predatory relationship to Springfield. He doesn't just want to make money. He wants to extract maximum wealth from people who can't afford to lose it. Burns's casino targets gambling addicts, offers easy credit to people in debt, and generally operates on the principle that destroying people's lives is acceptable if it increases revenue. His relationship with the Simpson family specifically shows Burns at his cruelest. He's poisoned Homer multiple times. He's stolen from the children. He's polluted their environment and endangered their safety. Yet the family can never truly oppose him because Homer's job depends on Burns's mercy. This power dynamic defines Springfield's entire economic structure. Workers know they're being exploited but can't fight back without losing their livelihoods. Burns represents how the wealthy maintain power through control of employment and selective memory. He commits crimes constantly but faces no consequences because the legal system protects people with money. He poisons the environment, but regulators won't shut down the plant because the town needs those jobs. Springfield's dependence on Burns makes them complicit in their own exploitation. They know he's evil, but they can't afford to oppose him. What makes Burns terrifying isn't his individual cruelty. It's how the system enables him. Every institution that should check his power, government, law enforcement, media, public health, has been corrupted or rendered ineffective. Burns doesn't need to be clever or subtle. He can commit crimes openly because he knows nobody will stop him. The corruption is so thorough that resistance isn't just futile, it's economically suicidal. The tragedy is that Springfield could function without Burns. They could shut down the nuclear plant, prosecute him for his crimes, and build a new economy. But doing so would require short-term sacrifice and collective action that the town can't organize. So they keep accepting Burns' abuses because the devil, feels safer than the uncertainty of change. Burns counts on this cowardice, and Springfield proves him right every day. Burns controls the adults through economic fear, but Springfield Elementary controls the kids, and that institution is somehow even more broken. Springfield Elementary proves that underfunded public education creates a cycle where teachers give up and students learn that trying doesn't matter. The school operates on the principle that children should be processed through grade levels as efficiently as possible with minimal investment in their actual education or well-being. Everything about the institution suggests it was designed to warehouse kids rather than teach them, and the faculty has long since stopped pretending otherwise. Principal Seymour Skinner embodies institutional failure and shows how trauma becomes administrative policy. Multiple episodes reveal that Skinner is actually Armin Tamzarian, a street tough from Capital City who assumed Seymour Skinner's identity after the real Skinner went missing during the Vietnam War. When the real Skinner returns in The Principal and the Pauper, the whole town decides they prefer the fake Skinner and force the real one to leave Springfield. This episode is hugely controversial among fans because it undermines Skinner's entire character, but it actually makes perfect sense thematically. Springfield Elementary is run by an imposter who's pretending to be someone he's not. The school itself is pretending to educate when it's actually just maintaining order. The students are pretending to learn while actually just waiting to escape. Skinner being a fraud is the perfect metaphor for the fraudulent institution he manages. Skinner's relationship with his mother Agnes shows how trauma perpetuates through control. Agnes is verbally abusive, emotionally manipulative, and treats adult Seymour like a child who needs constant supervision. Skinner never escaped his mother's control because his Vietnam PTSD made him too damaged to function independently. He came home from war needing structure and rules, and Agnes provided them by infantilizing him permanently. The flashback episodes showing Skinner in Vietnam reveal genuine trauma that would require serious therapy to process. He was a sergeant facing combat situations that left him with PTSD triggers activated by everything from firecrackers to loud noises. When he returned to civilian life, instead of getting help, he just suppressed everything and tried to create order through rigid rule enforcement. Springfield Elementary became his way of controlling an environment where he felt safe. Skinner's relationship with Edna Krabappel shows two damaged people trying to find connection through shared cynicism. They bond over recognizing that the school system is broken and that nothing they do will actually help these kids. Their romance is built on mutual understanding that they're both trapped in an institution that destroys hope. When they finally get together, it's not passionate. It's two exhausted people deciding that being lonely together is better than being lonely alone. Mrs. Krabappel represents teacher burnout taken to its logical conclusion. She openly drinks during school hours, sleeps with her window open so she can smoke, and tells students directly that she's given up on them. Her famous line, "The children are right to laugh at you," captures her complete abandonment of any pretense that she cares about education. Edna is there for a paycheck, and she's stopped lying about it. What makes Edna tragic is that she wasn't always this way. Flashback episodes suggest she started her career idealistic and hopeful. But years of dealing with budget cuts, administrative indifference, and students who don't care gradually destroyed her faith in education. Every year she put in effort and got nothing back. Eventually, she learned that caring was painful and futile, so she stopped. The episode where Lisa cheats to help the school win funding shows how test score pressures have corrupted even the best students. Lisa is the smartest kid in the school and doesn't need to cheat. But the school is so desperate for money that they pressure her to guarantee a high score on standardized tests. Lisa caves and cheats, then confesses because the guilt is unbearable. The school loses the funding, proving that honesty is punished while cheating would have been rewarded. Bart gets. An F demonstrates that Springfield Elementary has no resources for students who learn differently. When Bart is failing every subject and being threatened with repeating fourth grade, the school's solution is to just threaten him harder. They don't test him for learning disabilities, provide tutoring that matches his learning style, or address the underlying issues causing his struggles. They just tell him to try harder and punish him when he can't. The snow day that finally gives Bart time to study and pass his test proves that he could succeed with accommodations. Bart doesn't lack intelligence. He needs more time, less pressure, and teaching methods that work with his brain instead of against it. But Springfield Elementary doesn't have the resources or inclination to provide individualized education. They have one approach, and students either adapt or fail. Groundskeeper Willie is the only competent employee at Springfield Elementary, and he's not even a teacher. Willie maintains the building, fixes problems as they arise, and generally keeps the school functional despite having no support. Every other adult at the school is either incompetent or checked out. Willie is competent but has no authority to change anything, so his skills go wasted on maintenance instead of being used to actually help students. The school's constant budget crises show how public education fails when funding depends on property taxes and standardized test scores. Springfield Elementary is in a working-class neighborhood, so the tax base can't support proper education. The school needs money to improve test scores, but they can't get money without good test scores first. It's a death spiral where poor schools get poorer while rich schools get richer. Various episodes show the physical plant literally falling apart. The gym floor collapses. The roof leaks. The cafeteria serves food that's barely edible. The library has outdated books and broken computers. Students learn in an environment that communicates they don't matter, and their education isn't worth investing in. The building's decay mirrors the institutional decay in educational philosophy. The episode where Homer briefly becomes sanitation commissioner shows that Springfield's government priorities funding for garbage collection over education. The town will pay for convenient services that benefit everyone, but they won't fund schools that benefit future generations. This reflects real American values. Short-term convenience trumps long-term investment in children. Springfield Elementary's discipline system is purely punitive with no rehabilitation component. Students get detention, suspension, or expulsion, but never counseling or intervention addressing why they're misbehaving. Bart has been in detention thousands of times, and it's never changed his behavior. The school keeps doing the same thing, expecting different results, which is the definition of institutional insanity. The teachers' lounge scenes show faculty who have completely given up. They sit around complaining about students, making jokes about how terrible their jobs are, and counting down to retirement. Nobody talks about improving teaching methods or helping struggling students. They've accepted that their job is to survive each day and collect paychecks, not to actually educate. Miss Hoover, Lisa's teacher, represents the teacher who's competent enough to recognize gifted students, but too exhausted to nurture them properly. She acknowledges Lisa's intelligence, but doesn't provide advanced materials or challenges that would push Lisa to grow. Lisa spends every day bored in class because Miss Hoover can't differentiate instruction for different ability levels. The best teacher in the school still fails the best student because the system doesn't support excellence. The testing regime shows how schools have been reduced to test prep factories instead of places of learning. Teachers spend months drilling students on standardized test content instead of teaching critical thinking or creativity. Students learn to perform on tests without actually understanding material. The whole educational enterprise has been corrupted into producing scores instead of educated citizens. Springfield Elementary's approach to special education is to segregate students with disabilities into separate classrooms and forget about them. The special needs kids get minimal resources and low expectations. They're warehoused rather than educated, which is both cruel and illegal. But the school doesn't care because those students' test scores won't affect overall metrics. The cafeteria's food, being literally inedible, shows contempt for students' basic needs. Lunch Lady Doris serves grease on a stick, shredded newspapers instead of salad, and grade F meat that Marge discovers is rejected by prisons. Students are being fed garbage because feeding them properly would cost money the school won't spend. Nutrition directly affects learning, but Springfield Elementary doesn't care if students are hungry or malnourished. The school's approach to bullying is to ignore it until it becomes unavoidable, then punish the victim along with the aggressor. When Bart gets bullied by Nelson, teachers tell him to stand up for himself or stop being a target. When he fights back, he gets suspended too. The system treats bullying as a dispute between equals rather than abuse that adults should stop. Springfield Elementary proves that public education fails when society decides it's not worth funding. The teachers are burned out because they're unsupported. The students are disengaged because the curriculum is irrelevant. The building is falling apart because maintenance is deferred. Everything is broken, everyone knows it's broken, and nobody has the power or will to fix it because fixing education would require sustained investment over decades, and Americans won't fund things that don't show immediate returns. The school represents institutional abandonment of children. Springfield Elementary was built to warehouse kids while parents work, not to actually prepare them for successful adulthood. Some kids like Lisa succeed despite the school. Most kids like Bart are failed by it. The system perpetuates class inequality by ensuring that working-class kids get working-class education, while wealthy kids in other districts get resources that enable actual learning. While kids suffer at school, adults escape to the one place where everybody knows their name and nobody expects them to improve: Moe's Tavern. Moe's Tavern reveals that Springfield's social life revolves around men drinking away their failures, while Moe desperately tries to avoid becoming them, even though he's already worse off than his most pathetic customer. The bar operates as Springfield's emotional dumping ground, the place where everyone goes when they can't handle reality anymore. It's not a social club or community center, it's a shrine to giving up. Moe Shislak embodies failure so complete that suicide becomes a running gag instead of a cry for help. Multiple episodes show Moe attempting to kill himself through various methods: hanging, carbon monoxide poisoning, jumping off buildings. Every attempt fails through some coincidental intervention. The show plays this for laughs, but Moe's repeated suicide attempts reveal someone whose life has become unbearable and who sees death as a logical solution to suffering. What makes Moe particularly tragic is that he's capable of more. Flaming Moe's shows that Moe could have escaped his miserable life when Homer accidentally invents a drink recipe that becomes hugely popular. Moe steals the recipe, renames it the Flaming Moe, and his bar becomes the hottest nightclub in Springfield. Executives want to buy the recipe and make Moe rich. For a brief moment, success is within reach, but then Homer reveals publicly that he invented the drink and Moe's opportunity evaporates. Moe chose to steal from his best customer rather than credit Homer or split the profits. His dishonesty killed his one chance at escaping poverty and loneliness. The episode ends with Moe back in his crappy bar serving drunks, having learned nothing except that success is possible for other people, but never for him. This episode establishes Moe's core problem. He sabotages himself constantly, and then blames external circumstances for his failures. Moe could have partnered with Homer honestly, and they both would have profited. Instead, his greed and insecurity made him steal credit, which destroyed the opportunity. Every failure in Moe's life follows this pattern of self-sabotage followed by self-pity. Moe's various reinventions of his bar show him trying to escape his identity without actually changing. He transforms Moe's Tavern into a gay bar, a family restaurant, a fancy nightclub called M, and various other concepts. Each reinvention attracts new customers and makes money temporarily. But Moe always reverts to being a dive bar because he's too attached to his miserable identity to maintain success. Being sad and pathetic is his comfort zone, and prosperity makes him uncomfortable. The episode where Moe becomes a celebrated poet reveals another lost opportunity. Moe discovers he has genuine talent for writing emotional, evocative poetry. His work gets published and critics praise it. He could build a new life as a writer, but Moe is too insecure to accept that he deserves success. So he quits writing and goes back to tending bar. He literally cannot handle being good at something because it conflicts with his self-image as a loser. Moe's unrequited love for various women throughout the series shows his romantic life is as hopeless as everything else. He falls for Marge at one point, but she doesn't reciprocate. He dates women occasionally, but they always discover his pathetic qualities and leave. Moe is so desperate for affection that he becomes clingy and controlling, which drives away anyone who shows initial interest. His loneliness creates behavior that guarantees continued loneliness. The revelation that Moe's phone number is one digit away from Moe's Tavern explains Bart's prank calls. For decades, Bart has called asking for alcoholic, Amanda Hugginkiss, and other fake names. Moe falls for it every time, screaming threats into an empty bar. The prank calls are Moe's most consistent human interaction, besides serving drinks to drunks. That's how socially isolated he is. Harassment from a 10-year-old is his primary, non-transactional relationship. What makes the prank calls really sad is that Moe desperately wants connection, but can't distinguish genuine contact from mockery. When he yells for Seymour Butts, he's hoping someone real will respond. The disappointment when he realizes it's a prank never stops him from hoping the next call will be real. Moe is pathologically optimistic about human connection despite having no evidence that anyone likes him. Barney Gumble represents Moe's Tavern's most tragic regular customer and shows how alcoholism destroys potential that should have led to success. The episode Mr. Plow flashes back to Barney in high school as a straight A student accepted to Harvard. He's smart, ambitious, and destined for success. Then Homer offers him his first beer, and Barney's entire life trajectory changes in one moment. The flashback shows Barney immediately getting addicted after one beer. His grades collapse, he drops out of college, and he becomes the falling down drunk we know in present day. Think about that. One beer destroyed a future that included Harvard and probably a successful career. Barney's alcoholism is so severe that he couldn't recover from initial exposure. He's been drunk for over 25 years because Homer corrupted him as a teenager. What makes this heartbreaking is that Barney occasionally shows glimpses of the intelligent person he could have been. When he gets sober briefly in some episodes, his competence returns immediately. He becomes articulate, capable, and functional. Sobriety reveals that alcohol didn't destroy Barney's potential. It just buried it under addiction. The smart, capable person is still there, trapped inside the drunk. The episode where Barney gets sober and trains to be a helicopter pilot shows what he could accomplish without alcohol. He studies hard, passes difficult tests, and demonstrates natural skill at piloting. For a brief period, Barney escapes the bar and builds a different life. But then he relapses, drinks again, and destroys his new career. The pattern of brief sobriety followed by relapse suggests Barney is trapped in a cycle he might never escape. Barney's relationship with other bar regulars shows that Moe's Tavern operates as a support group for failures. Lenny and Carl are competent workers who drink to avoid going home to empty lives. Sam and Larry are background characters whose entire identity is drinking at Moe's. Everyone at the bar is running from something, and alcohol is their agreed-upon method of avoidance. Lenny and Carl's friendship reveals surprising depth beneath the surface alcoholism. Various episodes show they've been best friends since childhood, possibly with romantic undertones depending on interpretation. They work together, drink together, and spend nearly all their time in each other's company. Their friendship is probably the healthiest relationship in Springfield, which is saying something considering it's based on daily drinking. What makes Lenny and Carl interesting is that they're competent workers with stable jobs. They're not failures like Moe or alcoholics like Barney. They just drink every day after work because that's what working class men in Springfield do. The bar is their social club, their therapy session, and their escape from the mundane reality of nuclear plant work. Without Moe's Tavern, they'd have no community at all. The regulars' loyalty to Moe's Tavern, despite its terrible conditions, shows how important the space is to their identity. The bar is dirty, the beer is watered down, and Moe is consistently hostile, but they keep coming back because Moe's represents the one place in Springfield where failure is acceptable. Nobody judges you for being a drunk when everyone's a drunk. The bar's dysfunction enables their collective dysfunction. Various episodes show Moe watering down drinks, serving expired beer, and generally running the bar with minimal health standards. But customers don't complain because they're not there for quality. They're there for quantity and familiarity. Moe's Tavern succeeds by having zero standards and charging rock-bottom prices. It's a race to the bottom where everyone wins by losing together. The Duff Beer Company's relationship with Moe's shows how corporate alcohol profits from local misery. Duff supplies cheap beer to bars like Moe's, encouraging overconsumption and addiction. The company sponsors sports events and advertises constantly, normalizing heavy drinking as entertainment. Then they profit when people like Barney destroy their lives pursuing that entertainment. Moe's Tavern's role in Homer's life specifically shows how the bar enables his worst qualities. Homer drinks there every day after work, instead of going home to his family. He spends money they need on alcohol. He forms deeper bonds with bar regulars than with his own children. The bar gives Homer permission to be selfish and irresponsible because everyone there is equally selfish and irresponsible. When Marge tries to get Homer to stop drinking or spend less time at the bar, the regulars actively sabotage her efforts. They need Homer to keep drinking because his continued failure validates their own failures. If Homer quit and improved his life, it would expose that they could do the same. So they keep him trapped through peer pressure and enabling behavior. The episode where Moe's briefly closes shows what happens when the regulars lose their crutch. Homer falls apart without his daily drinking routine. Barney spirals even worse. The regulars wander Springfield looking for purpose and finding none. The bar's absence reveals how much of their identity was built around drinking together. Without alcohol and commiseration, they don't know who they are. Moe's Tavern represents Springfield's acceptance that some people are meant to fail, and society's job is just providing them a place to fail together. The bar doesn't try to help anyone improve or escape their problems. It just offers temporary numbness and companionship in dysfunction. That's enough to keep people coming back for decades, drinking away their lives while pretending they're having fun. The really dark truth about Moe's is that it's necessary for Springfield to function. Without a place where failures can gather and commiserate, they might actually have to confront their lives and change. The bar serves as a pressure valve, releasing the despair that would otherwise build up and explode. Moe provides a service to Springfield by containing its most desperate citizens in one location where they can self-medicate without becoming everyone else's problem. Moe himself is too trapped to see the irony. He provides escape for others while being unable to escape himself. He serves drinks that numb pain while being constantly reminded of his own pain that nothing numbs. He's the enabler who needs enabling, the support who has no support, the host of a sad party he can never leave. While Homer drinks with losers, other Springfield residents have found their own ways to cope with their failures. Let's talk about the supporting cast who make this town feel real. Springfield's supporting cast reveals that everyone in this town has a tragic backstory and shattered dreams. They're just better at hiding it than Homer. The recurring characters who populate Springfield create a community that feels lived in and authentic because each person has depth beyond their joke function. When you peel back the comedy, almost everyone is quietly suffering while maintaining a public persona of normalcy. Apu Nahasa Piema Petalon represents the immigrant experience and shows how the American dream requires sacrificing your identity and dignity for economic survival. Much Apu About Nothing establishes that Apu is an illegal immigrant who came to America for education and stayed when his student visa expired. He has a PhD in computer science from the University of Calcutta, meaning he's vastly overqualified for working convenience store shifts, but his immigration status limited his options, so he took whatever work he could find. The tragedy of Apu's character is that he works 96-hour weeks at the Quick E-Mart for minimum wage, sacrificing his health and relationships for a job that doesn't utilize any of his actual skills. He could be a professor or researcher, but instead he's restocking squishy machines and selling expired hot dogs. The American dream promised opportunity and delivered exploitation. When Springfield passes Proposition 24 to deport illegal immigrants, Apu has to prove his value to avoid deportation. The citizenship test requires him to know obscure facts about American history that most native-born citizens couldn't answer. He has to demonstrate exceptional knowledge to earn what other people get automatically at birth. The message is clear. Immigrants have to be better, smarter, and more American than Americans just to be allowed to stay. Apu's arranged marriage to Manjula shows him trying to maintain cultural traditions while living in a place that doesn't understand them. Their relationship starts awkwardly, but develops into genuine partnership. When Manjula has octuplets due to fertility treatments, Apu's life becomes even more chaotic and exhausting. 8 babies, plus a failing business, plus cultural expectations, creates pressure that would destroy most people. Apu just works harder. The controversial aspect of Apu's character is that he's a stereotype, the convenience store immigrant with a thick accent who works impossible hours. The criticism is valid, but it also erases that Apu is portrayed as intelligent, capable, and sympathetic. His accent doesn't make him stupid. His immigrant status doesn't make him less than. He's a fully realized character whose struggles reflect real experiences of immigrant workers in America. Comic Book Guy represents fandom taken to toxic extremes, where identity becomes performance and gatekeeping replaces genuine community. Jeff Albertson, revealed as his real name in later episodes, is smart enough to run a successful business and knowledgeable enough about pop culture to be considered an expert. But he uses that knowledge as a weapon to attack anyone who doesn't meet his standards of true fandom. His catchphrase, "worst episode ever," captures the cynicism of someone who consumes media obsessively while claiming to hate everything. Comic book. Guy can't enjoy things naturally because finding flaws is how he asserts superiority. Every movie, comic, and TV show gets picked apart and declared inferior to some imagined perfect version that exists only in his head. The episode where Comic Book Guy almost dies from a heart attack reveals that his obesity and sedentary lifestyle are killing him. He's eating himself to death while sitting in his store, judging other people's choices. But even after the health scare, he doesn't change. He goes right back to eating junk food and avoiding exercise because changing would require. Admitting his lifestyle is unsustainable. His brief romance with Principal Skinner's mother, Agnes, shows Comic Book Guy is capable of connection when he drops the superiority act. With Agnes, he's vulnerable and genuine. They bond over shared interests and compatible personalities. For a moment, Comic Book Guy experiences actual happiness instead of the performative joy of gatekeeping. But the relationship ends, and he retreats back into his cynical persona because being vulnerable is scary. Comic book. Guy's relationship with his customers is purely transactional with added contempt. He sells merchandise while insulting the people buying it. He makes kids feel bad about liking things wrong or not knowing obscure lore. The android's dungeon should be a welcoming space for nerds and outcasts, but Comic Book Guy has turned it into a hierarchy where he's on top and everyone else is a filthy casual. The really sad part is that Comic Book Guy has no real friends. People tolerate him because his store has rare comics and collectibles. The moment someone stops needing merchandise, they stop interacting with him. His entire social life is based on commercial transactions, which means he's fundamentally alone despite being surrounded by customers all day. Krusty the Clown embodies show business cynicism and reveals how fame corrupts people who started with genuine talent and good intentions. Herschel Schmoikel, Pinchas, Yerusham. Krustovsky grew up as the son of a rabbi who expected him to follow in his footsteps. Instead, Krusty wanted to make people laugh, creating a rift with his father that lasted decades. Like father, like clown shows the depth of that estrangement. Krusty's father disowned him for becoming a clown instead of a rabbi. They didn't speak for 25 years. The reconciliation only happens when Bart and Lisa intervene, using Talmudic arguments to convince Rabbi Krustovsky that comedy can serve God by bringing joy to people. The reunion is touching, but doesn't fix the underlying damage. Krusty's success as a children's entertainer came at the cost of becoming exactly what his father feared, a sellout who values money over integrity. Krusty licenses his name to terrible products, does commercials for anything regardless of quality, and generally treats his fame as a cash extraction machine. He's been married multiple times, gambles compulsively, and has massive debts despite earning millions. His illiteracy gets revealed in multiple episodes, showing that Krusty never learned to read properly. He hires people to read scripts to him and memorizes his lines phonetically. His entire career is built on performing words he doesn't understand. This explains why his merchandise is so terrible. He literally can't read contracts before signing them. Managers and executives exploit his illiteracy to make themselves rich while Krusty takes on debt. The episode where Krusty has a heart attack reveals the toll that decades of drug use, poor diet, and stress have taken on his body. He's had multiple heart attacks by age 60, surviving through luck rather than lifestyle changes. Doctors tell him to quit smoking, drinking, and eating junk food. Krusty ignores all medical advice and continues destroying his body because changing would mean confronting how empty his life has become. Krusty's gambling addiction specifically shows his self-destructive tendencies. He bets on everything and loses constantly. His debts to Fat Tony and other mobsters put him in genuine danger multiple times. But Krusty keeps gambling because the thrill temporarily distracts from his deep unhappiness. He's chasing the high of winning, even though he loses way more than he wins. His relationship with Sideshow Bob and subsequent attempts to murder him reveal how carelessly Krusty treats people who work for him. Bob was humiliated daily as Krusty's sidekick, literally getting pies thrown in his face and being made to look stupid. Bob is a genius who speaks multiple languages and appreciates high culture, but Krusty reduced him to a punching bag for crude physical comedy. Bob's transformation into a criminal was directly caused by Krusty's abuse. When Bob frames Krusty for armed robbery and sends him to prison, Krusty is genuinely confused about why Bob would hate him. He can't comprehend that years of humiliation would create resentment. This shows how fame has disconnected Krusty from normal human empathy. He sees his show as entertainment without considering how it affected the person being humiliated. Sideshow Mel, Bob's replacement, is treated better, but still exists as a prop rather than a person. Krusty doesn't know anything about Mel's personal life or treat him with respect. He's just the guy who gets hit with things on camera. The job pays well enough that Mel tolerates the abuse, creating another exploitative relationship where money excuses cruelty. Krusty's estrangement from his daughter Sophie, revealed in later episodes, shows another relationship destroyed by his narcissism. He fathered a child and abandoned her, leaving her mother to raise Sophie alone. When he reconnects with Sophie, Krusty wants the relationship on his terms, fitting her into his schedule between shows and gambling. He can't be a real father because that would require putting someone else's needs first. The recurring joke about Krusty doing commercials for anything reveals how fame corrupts artistic integrity. He'll endorse products he's never used and doesn't believe in. He'll lie directly to children about toy quality or food nutrition. His only moral line is whether the check clears. Every aspect of Krusty's life is for sale, which means nothing about him is authentic anymore. Chief Clancy Wiggum represents law enforcement incompetence taken to its logical extreme. Springfield's police department is corrupt, lazy, and actively harmful to public safety. Wiggum is too stupid to solve crimes, too corrupt to care about justice, and too cowardly to confront actual criminals. He's the perfect police chief for a town that has given up on the concept of law and order. Multiple episodes show Wiggum taking bribes, ignoring crimes when they're inconvenient, and generally treating his job as a source of donuts and napping opportunities. When actual emergencies happen, Wiggum is either absent or actively makes things worse. His incompetence would be funny, except it's people's lives he's endangering through his refusal to do basic police work. Lou and Eddie, his subordinate officers, are more competent than Wiggum, but enable his incompetence through loyalty. They could report his corruption or circumvent his bad decisions, but they just follow orders regardless of legality or common sense. This creates a police force where incompetence is protected and perpetuated rather than corrected. The Springfield connection shows what happens when competent people join the police force. Marge briefly becomes a cop and immediately starts actually enforcing laws. She tickets people for minor violations responds quickly to emergencies, and generally does the job properly. The department hates this because her competence exposes their laziness. They pressure her to stop trying so hard until she eventually quits in frustration. Dr. Julius Hibbert and Dr. Nick Riviera represent the medical system's extremes: expensive competence and cheap malpractice. Hibbert is a skilled doctor who charges rates most Springfield residents can't afford. His inappropriate laughter at patients' suffering suggests he's developed dark humor as a coping mechanism for seeing tragedy daily. He's good at his job, but emotionally disconnected from patients as people. Dr. Nick, meanwhile, is barely qualified to practice medicine, and his prices reflect that. "Hi, everybody," greets patients with false cheer before performing procedures he's not trained for. His degree is from Hollywood Upstairs Medical College, a name that immediately suggests fraud. But poor Springfield residents use him because they can't afford Dr. Hibbert. The choice is between expensive competent care and cheap dangerous care with no middle option. The episode where Dr. Nick almost kills Homer through incompetent surgery shows the risk of using cut-rate medical care. Nick doesn't know human anatomy, uses improvised surgical tools, and generally has no idea what he's doing. Homer survives through luck rather than medical skill. But people keep using Dr. Nick because being treated incompetently is better than not being treated at all when you can't afford proper care. These supporting characters prove that everyone in Springfield is quietly struggling with their own failures and traumas. Apu is overqualified and exploited. Comic Book Guy is lonely and bitter. Krusty is addicted and empty. Wiggum is corrupt and incompetent. Dr. Nick is a fraud enabling a broken healthcare system. Each character could be the protagonist of their own tragedy, but we only see glimpses of their pain between jokes. What makes Springfield feel real is that background characters have complete lives that continue when they're not on screen. They're not just joke delivery systems. They're people with histories, motivations, and problems that make sense given their circumstances. The town's dysfunction is comprehensive rather than selective, affecting everyone from the main family to the most minor recurring character. All these characters live in a town that somehow functions despite completely corrupt leadership. Let's talk about Springfield's government. Springfield's government proves that democracy fails when voters are idiots and politicians know it. Mayor Joe Quimby maintains power through a combination of corruption, nepotism, and the voters' complete inability to remember scandals longer than one election cycle. He's modeled after the Kennedy family with their Boston accent and alleged mob connections, but without any of the idealism or public service. Quimby is in politics purely for personal enrichment and sexual access to interns. Multiple episodes reveal Quimby's affairs, embezzlement schemes, and connections to organized crime. He keeps a mistress that everyone knows about. He takes bribes openly. He uses city funds for personal expenses. None of this prevents his re-election because Springfield voters either don't care about corruption or actively expect it from politicians. Quimby wins because he's a known quantity in a town that fears change more than theft. Marge versus the monorail shows Springfield's government at its most gullible. When the town receives a windfall from fining Mr. Burns for illegal waste dumping, they hold a town meeting to decide how to spend the money. Marge suggests fixing the dangerous Main Street that's caused countless accidents. Everyone agrees until Lyle Lanley arrives with his monorail pitch. Lanley is an obvious con artist who uses a musical number and vague promises to convince Springfield to spend their entire budget on a monorail. Nobody asks for business plans, safety reviews, or references. They just get excited about having something fancy and vote to waste millions on a scam. This reveals that Springfield makes decisions based on emotion rather than logic, and con artists know how to exploit that weakness. The monorail inevitably falls apart mid-journey because it was built with the cheapest materials and no safety features. Homer, randomly selected as conductor despite having no training, has to stop the train before it crashes. The entire debacle should have ended with criminal investigations and prosecutions, but Springfield just moves on to the next crisis. Lanley gets away with fraud because holding him accountable would require effort. This episode establishes that Springfield's government prioritizes spectacle over substance. They'd rather have one shiny, visible project than boring, necessary infrastructure improvements. Politicians like Quimby encourage this because spectacle gets them reelected, while infrastructure maintenance doesn't. The town's crumbling roads, broken streetlights, and dangerous utilities are less important than having something new to brag about. Trash of the Titans shows Homer successfully running for sanitation commissioner through populism and impossible promises. When the current commissioner, Ray Patterson, refuses to give Homer special treatment, Homer gets angry and decides to run against him. Homer's entire platform is promising better services at no cost, which is obviously impossible. But Springfield voters believe him because they want to believe someone will solve their problems without requiring sacrifice. Homer wins through a campaign of attack ads and rallies that never explain how he'll actually deliver on promises. Once in office, he immediately proves incompetent, spending the entire annual budget in 1 month on giveaways and excessive services. When money runs out, Homer sells underground mining rights to pay for garbage collection. This pollutes the town's groundwater and causes sinkholes, but solves the short-term budget crisis. The episode ends with Ray Patterson being rehired after Homer's spectacular failure. Patterson's response is perfect. He tells Springfield that he's not going to do any extra work to fix Homer's mess. They voted for Homer's incompetence, so they'll live with the consequences. This is one of the few times Springfield faces accountability for their terrible decisions, though the underground pollution suggests long-term harm they haven't yet discovered. Mr. Spritz Goes to Washington shows Krusty winning a congressional seat through celebrity and name recognition rather than any political knowledge or platform. Krusty knows nothing about government, has no policy positions, and doesn't care about constituents. He runs because he's bored, and winning would be a new form of attention. Springfield votes for him because he's famous, and they recognize his name. Once in Congress, Krusty immediately becomes corrupt, accepting bribes and doing favors for special interests. He doesn't read legislation or attend committee meetings. He just shows up for photo ops and votes, however his handlers tell him. This satirizes celebrity politicians, but also shows how little voters care about actual governance. They want entertainment, not effective representation. The town's mob mentality gets displayed in multiple episodes where Springfield residents form angry mobs over trivial issues. They tried to burn Moe as a witch. They rioted over a missing lemon tree. They voted to deport immigrants based on manufactured crisis. The town operates on collective emotion rather than individual reason, making them easy to manipulate. Fat Tony and the Springfield Mafia show how organized crime fills the gaps in legitimate government. When city services fail or regulations aren't enforced, the mob steps in with their own version of order. Fat Tony controls construction, waste disposal, and various other industries through intimidation and bribery. Politicians take his money and ignore his crimes because fighting organized crime would be expensive and dangerous. The mob's relationship with city government is symbiotic rather than antagonistic. Fat Tony bribes Quimby and Wiggum to ignore his operations. In return, he keeps violence relatively controlled and only kills people who threaten his business. The city gets tax revenue from mob businesses while pretending not to know they're illegal. Everyone benefits except regular citizens who pay higher prices due to mob monopolies. Judge Roy Snyder represents the judicial system's complete inconsistency and corruption. His rulings make no legal sense, often based on personal whim rather than law or precedent. He sentences people to absurdly harsh punishments for minor crimes and lets serious criminals go free. The randomness suggests he's either incompetent or taking bribes, possibly both. Springfield's approach to crises is always reactive rather than proactive. They wait until disaster strikes, then implement half measures that barely address the immediate problem while ignoring root causes. The town has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times through riots, environmental catastrophes, and mob violence. Each time, they rebuild in the exact same broken way and wonder why problems keep recurring. The relationship between state and federal government shows Springfield as a forgotten backwater that receives minimal oversight. Federal agencies occasionally notice Springfield's dysfunction and try to intervene, but local corruption defeats reform efforts. The town is too small to matter nationally, but too corrupt to reform locally, creating a stable equilibrium of failure. Springfield's government proves that institutions only work when people care about making them work. Since nobody in Springfield cares enough to demand accountability or sacrifice personal interest for public good, the system degrades into competing corruption. Quimby steals from the budget, Wiggum accepts bribes, Fat Tony runs protection rackets, and voters enable all of it by refusing to vote for anyone promising necessary change. The town's motto might as well be good enough for now, because that's the standard for every decision. Roads are fixed temporarily with cheap materials that fail quickly. Schools are funded just enough to avoid closure. Police respond to only the most serious crimes. Everything is maintained at the minimum viable level, which means everything is slowly decaying. But before we continue talking about Springfield's institutions, subscribe to our channel. Now let's talk about the holidays and traditions that bring this dysfunctional town together. Springfield's holidays reveal that even the most dysfunctional community can come together for traditions, even if those traditions involve monsters, murder, and massive property damage. The Treehouse of Horror episodes establish Halloween as Springfield's most important holiday and show how the town collectively agrees to suspend reality for one night of supernatural chaos. These non-canon specials started in Season 2 and became the show's most anticipated annual event. The format allows writers to kill characters, destroy the town, and explore horror scenarios without affecting the main continuity. The genius of Treehouse of Horror is that it reveals what Springfield would be like without consequences. Characters can be violently murdered, reality can collapse, and apocalyptic scenarios can play out because none of it counts. The episodes function as the show's ID, expressing dark impulses that regular episodes can't explore. They're also consistently the funniest and most creative episodes because freed from continuity means freedom to experiment. The early Treehouse of Horror episodes were genuinely trying to be scary within the show's format. The Raven segment from the first Halloween special features James Earl Jones narrating Poe's poem while Bart imagines himself as the narrator being haunted by Bart Raven. The animation is atmospheric, the music is eerie, and the adaptation respects the source material while adding Simpsons humor. It's legitimately good horror for a comedy show. But as the series continued, Treehouse of Horror became more about parody than genuine scares. Later, episodes spoof horror movies and science fiction rather than creating original scary stories. This shift reflects the show's overall trajectory from grounded satire to pop culture reference machine. The Halloween episodes lost their edge while gaining more elaborate production values. Time and Punishment from Treehouse of Horror Fee represents the peak of the format. Homer accidentally creates a time machine from a toaster and keeps changing the past in ways that create nightmare timelines. One change makes Flanders the unquestioned lord and master of the world. Another creates a timeline where it rains donuts. The segment is funny, clever, and surprisingly dark as Homer keeps murdering alternate versions of his family while searching for his original timeline. The ending perfectly captures the show's cynicism. Homer finally returns to what he thinks is his original timeline, but everyone eats with their tongues because he accidentally killed all prehistoric insects. Homer decides this is close enough and just accepts the weird lizard tongue reality rather than keep trying. This suggests that all timelines are equally broken and trying to find perfection is futile. Nightmare Cafeteria from the same episode shows Skinner and the teachers literally eating students to solve overcrowding and budget shortfalls. They start with troublemakers like Bart and Jimbo, cooking them into cafeteria food. The episode plays this completely straight as horror rather than winking comedy. The image of Skinner grinding Uter into meat in the school cafeteria is genuinely disturbing despite being cartoon absurdity. The evolution of Treehouse of Horror opening credits became an annual tradition where characters die in increasingly elaborate ways. Early episodes had simple Halloween imagery. Later ones featured movie parodies, famous painting recreations, and extended sequences that are mini episodes themselves. The credits became as anticipated as the actual segments. What makes the Halloween episodes work is that they reveal character truth through absurdist scenarios. When Homer becomes a giant and destroys Springfield, he's acting out his usual selfishness at kaiju scale. When Lisa creates miniature civilization in a science experiment, her God complex reflects her regular know-it-all attitude. The supernatural scenarios are metaphors for personality flaws that exist in regular episodes but can't be acknowledged directly. Christmas in Springfield reveals that financial stress and family dysfunction intensify during holidays, meant for joy and togetherness. Simpsons. Roasting on an open fire, the series premiere establishes the pattern. Homer's Christmas bonus gets canceled. Marge secretly spent the savings on removing Bart's tattoo, and the family can't afford presents. Homer desperately gets a job as mall Santa, hiding his failure from the family while trying to earn enough for gifts. The episode's ending, where Homer bets his mall Santa earnings on a dog race and wins Santa's little helper instead of money, perfectly captures the show's Christmas philosophy. Material wealth would solve problems temporarily, but family connection through adopting a pet provides lasting value. The dog becomes one of the family despite Homer's plan failing. Accidental love substitutes for intended generosity. Every subsequent Christmas episode features similar financial crises. The family's always broke during holidays, forcing them to scramble for solutions that barely work. This reflects real working-class experiences where Christmas creates pressure to spend money they don't have on gifts that exceed their budget. The show treats this struggle seriously, even while mining it for comedy. Marge Be Not Proud shows Christmas conflict from Bart's perspective when he shoplifts a video game instead of asking his parents to buy it. Getting caught by store security is humiliating enough, but the real punishment is seeing how disappointed Marge is. The photoplay scene where Marge doesn't include Bart in the family picture because he violated her trust is genuinely heartbreaking. Bart realizes that disappointing his mother hurts worse than any formal punishment. The episode's resolution comes when Bart buys Marge a present with his own money and apologizes sincerely. Marge forgives him immediately and takes a photo booth picture of just the two of them. Their relationship survives because Marge recognizes that Bart's shoplifting came from wanting something he knew the family couldn't afford. She punishes the behavior but forgives the child. 'Tis the 15th season explores how Christmas temporarily transforms people into better versions of themselves. Homer gets a concussion and develops temporary saintly behavior, becoming generous and thoughtful. He gives away money, helps neighbors, and generally acts like Ned Flanders. Springfield is confused by nice Homer because his usual selfishness is more comfortable than unexpected generosity. The episode asks whether people can actually change or whether personality is fixed. Homer's goodness comes from brain injury rather than genuine transformation. When the effect wears off, he returns to normal selfishness. The message is pessimistic. People can temporarily act better, but fundamental nature reasserts itself. Christmas magic isn't real enough to create lasting change. Thanksgiving in Springfield always features conflict rather than harmony, proving that forcing families to gather creates tension when underlying problems haven't been resolved. Bart vs. Thanksgiving remains the definitive Thanksgiving episode, with Bart destroying Lisa's centerpiece and running away rather than apologize. The family's attempts to have a perfect holiday collapse because their dysfunction can't be hidden during forced togetherness. What makes Thanksgiving episodes interesting is that they acknowledge holidays don't fix broken relationships. Homer and Marge still resent each other during turkey dinner. Bart and Lisa still fight over everything. Grandpa still gets forgotten and neglected. The holiday just adds pressure to perform happiness, while actually feeling resentful about obligations. Whacking Day reveals that Springfield has its own bizarre local traditions that reflect the town's collective insanity. Every May 10th, Springfield residents beat snakes to death with clubs to celebrate the town's founding. It's a completely made-up holiday with no historical basis, but the town treats it like sacred tradition. Children get the day off school to participate in snake murder. Lisa's research proves that Whacking Day was invented in 1924 as an excuse to beat up Irish immigrants. The snake violence is a sanitized version of ethnic violence, but when Lisa reveals this history, Springfield doesn't care. They like having a holiday where socially acceptable violence occurs. The town chooses comfortable tradition over uncomfortable truth, even when the tradition is actively harmful. The episode ends with Barry White's bass voice saving the snakes by luring them to Lisa's house where they're protected. Springfield's whacking day gets exposed and canceled, but the underlying impulse toward tradition-justified violence remains. The town will find new excuses to hurt things because that impulse is baked into Springfield's culture. Love, Springfieldian. Style parodies romantic movies through anthology format, where Homer and Marge play characters in famous romance stories. The episode uses love stories to examine the Simpson marriage from different angles, showing that their relationship works in any setting as long as core dynamics remain. Homer is always selfish and stupid. Marge is always long-suffering and enabling. The era and circumstances change, but the relationship doesn't. This Valentine's Day tradition reveals that Springfield's idea of romance is deeply cynical. Every love story is about people settling for partners who disappoint them, because being alone is worse. Even the most romantic scenarios get undercut by the character's fundamental flaws. Love survives not because it conquers all, but because both people are too scared to be alone. The Simpsons' 138th episode, Spectacular and Gump Roast represent the show becoming self-aware about its own history and turning past episodes into content for clip shows. These episodes exist because producing new material is expensive, but they also show the series recognizing its place in television history. By season 7, The Simpsons had enough episodes to reference its own past and create meta-content. Behind the Laughter parodies VH1 documentary format to create a fake history of The Simpsons as actors playing roles rather than animated characters. The episode claims the family fell apart due to drugs, ego conflicts, and creative disputes. It's completely fake but plays into real concerns about the show's quality declining and cast conflicts. The meta-humor works because it addresses what viewers were already thinking. Springfield Film Festival and various telethons show the town coming together around shared culture and charity. These events reveal community values. They'll support arts when it's entertaining, but abandon serious culture when it requires effort. They'll donate to charity during telethons, but ignore systemic problems causing the need for charity. Springfield's community spirit is performative rather than substantive. The holidays and special events in Springfield prove that shared traditions create community identity. Even when those traditions are stupid or harmful, the town needs excuses to gather and remember they're part of something larger than their individual failures. Halloween lets them embrace horror. Christmas forces them to perform generosity. Whacking Day gives them socially sanctioned violence. Each tradition serves a psychological function that makes Springfield feel like home despite its dysfunction. Beyond holidays, Springfield has institutions that define daily life and show how the community actually functions when it's not burning something down. Springfield's institutions reveal how communities form around shared spaces, even when those spaces are run by incompetent or corrupt people. The First Church of Springfield represents the town's complicated relationship with religion, where everyone claims faith but nobody actually follows religious teachings. Reverend Timothy Lovejoy leads a congregation that attends church weekly while completely ignoring Christian values. In their daily lives, the disconnect between Sunday morning performance and weekday behavior shows how Springfield uses religion as social ritual rather than moral framework. In Marge We Trust explores Reverend Lovejoy's crisis of faith and reveals how he became the burned-out pastor who barely cares anymore. Flashback shows young Lovejoy as an enthusiastic minister excited to help his congregation. Then Ned Flanders started calling him constantly with minor questions about sin and moral uncertainty. After years of Ned's obsessive religious anxiety, Lovejoy stopped caring about everyone because helping one person destroyed his capacity to help anyone. This explains why Lovejoy treats most congregation members with barely concealed contempt. He's exhausted from decades of people treating him like a spiritual vending machine where they input a question and expect dispensed wisdom. Lovejoy learned that actually caring about people's spiritual development leads to burnout, so he stopped caring to survive. His ministry became a job rather than a calling. The church building itself reflects Springfield's priorities. It's well maintained from offering plate donations, but those donations come from people who sin constantly and donate to buy forgiveness rather than change behavior. The church operates as a spiritual laundering service where bad people make donations to feel okay about staying bad. Lovejoy enables this by never challenging anyone, because challenging them would require energy he doesn't have. Helen Lovejoy, the Reverend's wife, runs Springfield's gossip network and shows how church becomes social control rather than spiritual community. Helen knows everyone's secrets and spreads rumors dressed as concern. She positions herself as moral authority while being the most judgmental and cruel person in town. Her "won't somebody please think of the children" catchphrase reveals how moral panic gets weaponized to control behavior. The church youth groups and Bible studies are really just social clubs where kids whose parents make them attend find ways to tolerate forced participation. There's no genuine spiritual education or character development. It's Sunday school as babysitting with prayer. The kids memorize Bible verses to satisfy adults, but don't internalize any actual values. Springfield's relationship with Christianity shows American civil religion, where church attendance is social expectation rather than faith commitment. People go because that's what you do, not because they believe. Prayer happens before meals and during crises, but nobody expects God to actually respond. Religion is theater that comforts people without requiring change. The Quickie Mart represents immigrant labor, exploitation, and corporate franchise abuse of workers and customers simultaneously. Apu works 24 hours a day because the corporation demands stores stay open but doesn't provide staffing budget for multiple employees. He sleeps in shifts behind the counter, showers in the restroom, and basically lives at work. The American dream reduced to being imprisoned in a convenience store. The squishy machine that's always broken reveals how franchises force franchisees to use specific suppliers regardless of quality. Apu can't fix the machine properly because corporate mandates which repair services he can use. So the machine breaks repeatedly, but he's contractually obligated to keep serving squishies from a broken machine that makes kids sick. Corporate policy prioritizes brand consistency over food safety. Apu's selling of expired products shows desperation to minimize waste when margins are so thin that throwing away spoiled food means losing money. He rotates hot dogs on warmers for days, sells milk past expiration, and generally violates health codes to avoid financial loss. Customers get sick, but they're too poor to shop elsewhere, creating a captive market for substandard products. Who Shot Apu shows that working retail in Springfield means constant robbery risk. Snake holds up the Quick E-Mart so often that Apu recognizes him, and they have casual conversation during robberies. The police won't do anything because petty theft isn't worth their effort. Apu just accepts robbery as cost of business, raising prices to compensate for stolen merchandise and passing the cost to other customers. Apu's brief firing from the Quick E-Mart shows how easily corporations discard workers after years of exploitation. When Apu gets in trouble for price gouging during a shortage, corporate fires him immediately despite him making them millions over 20 years. He's replaceable, and the company has no loyalty to long-term employees. He has to travel to India and convince the Quick E-Mart Corporation founder to give him his job back. The android's dungeon and baseball card shop represents nerd culture before it became mainstream and profitable. Comic Book Guy runs his store as a gatekeeping fortress where true fans are separated from poseurs through trivia, test, and contempt. His business model is selling merchandise while insulting customers for not meeting his standards of fandom purity. What makes the android's dungeon sad is that it should be a welcoming space for outcasts and nerds who don't fit in elsewhere. Instead, Comic Book Guy has made it hostile and exclusive, recreating the same social hierarchies that made nerds outcasts in the first place. The store fails as community space because the owner values feeling superior over actual human connection. Comic book. Guy's periodic near-death experiences suggest his lifestyle is literally killing him, but he won't change, because changing would mean admitting how he lives is unsustainable. He'd rather die surrounded by comic books than live a longer life that requires giving up his identity as Comic Book Guy. The store is both his business and his tomb. The comic conventions and collectible shows that Springfield hosts reveal nerd culture as primarily commercial rather than genuinely creative. People spend thousands on merchandise while creators who made the original works get nothing. The entire culture is about consumption and collection rather than creation or community. Comic Book Guy is the perfect avatar for this. He consumes and hoards, but produces nothing. Springfield YMCA and various recreation centers show the town's commitment to public spaces where people can gather for activities and exercise. But these spaces are always underfunded and falling apart, suggesting that community wellness is low priority compared to other spending. The pools are dirty, the equipment is broken, and the staff is unmotivated. Youth sports leagues show parents projecting their failed dreams onto children who just want to play. Homer coaches Bart's baseball team and becomes obsessed with winning instead of letting kids have fun. Every sport becomes competition with screaming parents and humiliated children. The leagues that should teach cooperation and recreation instead teach kids that nothing matters except winning. The community center's boxing program and other activities show that some kids need structured outlets for energy and aggression. Without these programs, kids would have nowhere to go after school except home to neglect or streets to trouble. The programs work when properly funded, but funding is always threatened by budget cuts prioritizing other things. Springfield's news media shows how journalism fails when profit drives coverage decisions and sensationalism replaces investigation. Kent Brockman and Channel 6 News represent local news as entertainment rather than information. Every story is framed for maximum drama, regardless of actual importance. Missing cats get the same urgent coverage as political corruption. Brockman's famous line, "I, for one, welcome our new insect overlords," shows how quickly journalists abandon integrity when faced with power. During an incident where ants appear to be taking over, Brockman immediately pledges loyalty to the insects, hoping to be spared. This satirizes how media becomes propaganda when threatened, abandoning truth for survival. The newspaper industry's decline throughout the series reflects real journalism collapse. The Springfield shopper goes from robust daily to struggling weekly to barely existing. Print media can't compete with television and internet, so investigative journalism disappears. Nobody holds power accountable because nobody pays reporters to investigate anymore. Behind the Laughter and other episodes showing media manipulation reveal how news creates narrative rather than reporting reality. Kent Brockman admits to fabricating stories and editing footage to create drama. The news business rewards sensationalism over accuracy, so that's what gets produced. Viewers can't trust anything they see because profit motive has corrupted information. These institutions show that communities need gathering places where people can be themselves and pursue shared interests. But Springfield's institutions are all corrupted by underfunding, incompetent leadership, or profit motives that override public service. The church should provide spiritual community, but became social theater. The quick E-Mart should serve the neighborhood, but exploits it. Comic book. Guy's store should welcome nerds, but gatekeeps them. The news should inform, but sensationalizes. Springfield's institutional failure is comprehensive rather than selective. Every structure meant to serve the public has been hollowed out and repurposed to serve other interests. The buildings still exist and perform their functions, but the spirit of public service has died. People go through motions of community while actually being isolated individuals consuming products and services that don't fulfill their actual needs. Now that we've explored how Springfield works as a community, let's talk about how The Simpsons evolved as a show and became self-aware about its own existence. The Simpsons' evolution reveals something fascinating. The show knew it was declining and commented on its own irrelevance while continuing to exist anyway. The series premiered in December 1989 and immediately became a cultural phenomenon. For its first 8 or 9 seasons, commonly called the Golden Age, The Simpsons was the smartest, funniest, and most culturally relevant show on television. Then something changed. The exact moment of decline is debated among fans, but the principal and the pauper from season 9 is often cited as the point where the show fundamentally broke. The episode reveals that Principal Skinner is actually Armin Tamzarian, an imposter who assumed the real Seymour Skinner's identity. After the real Skinner returns, the whole town decides they prefer the fake one and forces the real Seymour to leave Springfield forever. Here's what made this episode so controversial. It destroyed years of character development by revealing Skinner's entire identity was fake. His relationship with his mother, his Vietnam service, his anal retentive personality, all of it belonged to someone else. Armin Tamzarian is a street tough from Capital City who has been playing a role. Everything we knew about Skinner was retconned in one episode that ended with everyone agreeing to never speak of it again. The episode literalizes what was happening to the show itself, pretending to be something it wasn't and hoping nobody noticed. The Golden Age Simpsons was over, but this new version kept using the same name and characters while being fundamentally different underneath. Fans recognized the transformation even if they couldn't articulate it yet. The principal and the pauper made the change impossible to ignore. The decline shows up in multiple ways. Early episodes had jokes that emerged from character and situation. Later episodes had characters acting out of character to set up pop culture references and celebrity cameos. Homer went from lazy but functional to aggressively stupid. The show went from satirizing American culture to just referencing it. Stories that used to take 22 minutes now got crammed into 11, so they could fit 2 unrelated plots per episode. Celebrity cameos became a particular sign of creative bankruptcy. Early seasons used celebrities sparingly and made them play characters rather than themselves. When Dustin Hoffman voiced Lisa's substitute teacher, he used a pseudonym and fully committed to the character. The celebrity wasn't the joke. Later seasons paraded celebrity after celebrity through Springfield, each playing themselves and referencing their own fame. The show was starstruck instead of satirical. The animation evolution shows how increased production values couldn't compensate for weaker writing. Early Simpsons was crudely animated with characters that looked slightly different in each scene. By season 10, digital animation made everything smooth and consistent. High-definition later seasons look gorgeous, but somehow feel less alive than the rough early years. Technical improvement coincided with creative decline. Self-aware episodes, where the show acknowledged its own history, became more common as the series aged. The Simpsons' 138th episode Spectacular featured Troy McClure showing deleted scenes, alternate endings, and making jokes about production. Gump Roast was a clip show framed as a roast where Springfield residents mocked the family. These episodes worked as nostalgia, but also reminded viewers how much better the show used to be. Behind the Laughter deserves special attention as the show's most meta episode. Framed as a VH1 documentary about The Simpsons as actors playing roles, the episode claims the family fell apart due to cocaine addiction, ego conflicts, and creative exhaustion. It's funny, but also uncomfortably close to reality about shows that run too long and cast members who get tired of their roles. The episode ends with the narrator explaining that the family reunited and continued making episodes, but there's a weariness in the framing that suggests everyone knows this is purely commercial. They're making more Simpsons because it's profitable, not because anyone has new stories to tell. The passion is gone, but the machine continues. What makes The Simpsons' decline fascinating is how self-aware it became. Multiple episodes acknowledge that the show has jumped the shark or that nothing new can be said. Characters break the fourth wall to comment that they're in a repetitive situation. The writers know the show is past its prime but can't stop because too many people's livelihoods depend on continued production. The prediction phenomenon adds another layer to the show's cultural legacy. The Simpsons supposedly predicted Donald Trump's presidency, Disney buying Fox, smartwatches, video calling, autocorrect errors, and dozens of other future events. Some predictions were legitimate satire that aged into reality. Others are confirmation bias, where people find coincidental matches between old episodes and current events. The Trump presidency prediction from Bart to the Future actually happened. The episode showed Lisa becoming president after Trump's disastrous term. When Trump actually won in 2016, the prediction seemed prophetic, but writers later admitted they chose Trump as president because he was the most absurd possibility they could imagine, not because they seriously thought he'd win. Reality became more absurd than satire. Disney buying Fox was another supposed prediction. An old episode showed a sign saying 20th Century Fox, a division of Walt Disney Co. Years later, Disney actually bought Fox's entertainment assets, but the joke wasn't a prediction. It was commentary on media consolidation trends that were obvious to anyone paying attention. The Simpsons recognized where corporate media was heading and made a joke about it. Reality just caught up. The prediction phenomenon shows how long-running shows become cultural touchstones where people search for meaning and pattern. With over 700 episodes, The Simpsons has depicted so many scenarios that some will inevitably resemble future events. People remember the hits and forget the thousands of jokes that predicted nothing. The show's politics evolved from anti-establishment satire to both sides' ism to occasionally progressive messaging. Early seasons mocked Reagan and Bush Sr. while celebrating working-class resistance to corporate power. Middle seasons tried to offend everyone equally, becoming South Park before South Park existed. Recent seasons have taken clearer progressive stances on issues like gay marriage and environmentalism. This political evolution reflects changing creative teams and cultural expectations. The original writers were Gen X cynics who trusted nothing. Later writers grew up on The Simpsons and unconsciously replicated its formula without understanding what made it work. Current writers are trying to make the show relevant to contemporary issues, but are constrained by characters frozen in time. The strangest aspect of The Simpsons' longevity is that it outlived its cultural relevance but kept existing. The show that defined Gen X humor and millennial childhood became something kids born after 2000 barely know. New episodes air but don't create cultural conversation anymore. The Simpsons is still on, but nobody's watching except people who have watched so long they can't stop. The show crossed into zombie territory somewhere around season 15 or 20, depending on who you ask. It's neither good enough to justify continued production nor bad enough to cancel when it's still profitable. Disney keeps making new episodes because the Simpsons brand is valuable, even if individual episodes aren't very good. The show has become the thing it originally satirized, a corporate product prioritizing profit over quality. Voice actor aging created uncomfortable situations where 90-year-old actors voice 10-year-old characters. The performers have been voicing these roles for over 30 years. They're tired, and you can hear it. The vocal performance lack the energy and range they had in early seasons. Characters sound bored because actors are bored after speaking the same lines in the same voices for decades. Writer turnover destroyed institutional knowledge about who these characters were and what the show stood for. Early writers like Conan O'Brien and Greg Daniels understood The Simpsons as satire of American capitalism and family dysfunction. They left for other opportunities, and replacement writers didn't have the same understanding. The show became increasingly about being The Simpsons rather than satirizing anything specific. What makes The Simpsons' evolution tragic is that it could have ended gracefully, but chose immortality instead. Imagine if the show ended after season 8 or 10, preserving its legacy as the greatest animated sitcom ever made. Instead, it continued for 25 more seasons, degrading its own reputation while training viewers to expect decline from everything they love. The show's influence on animation is undeniable, even as its own quality collapsed. South Park, Family Guy, Bob's Burgers, BoJack Horseman, and basically every adult animated series exists because The Simpsons proved animation could be sophisticated and culturally relevant. But those shows also learned from The Simpsons' mistakes, mostly by ending while still good rather than continuing forever. The current state of The Simpsons is awkward for everyone involved. Disney owns the show and won't cancel it because the brand is worth billions. Voice actors can't quit because the paychecks are too good. Writers want to work on something new, but need the steady employment. Fans want the show to end with dignity, but can't look away. Everyone's trapped in a loop where The Simpsons continues because it's easier than stopping. The show's self-awareness about its decline makes it worse rather than better. When episodes joke about how long the series has run or how repetitive plots have become, it's not clever meta-humor. It's admission of creative bankruptcy dressed as self-deprecation. The show knows it's bad, but keeps going anyway because acknowledging problems doesn't require fixing them. Which brings us to the most important question. What has The Simpsons' legacy actually been? How did a yellow family change culture forever? The Simpsons didn't just entertain a generation. It shaped how we think, talk, and understand satire in ways we barely recognize anymore. The show's influence is so comprehensive that it's invisible. People quote The Simpsons constantly without realizing they're doing it. Phrases like dough, meh, and cromulent entered the dictionary because the show invented vocabulary that English needed but didn't have. The show's impact on comedy writing is immeasurable. Before The Simpsons, sitcoms were mostly filmed in front of live studio audiences with laugh tracks and clear moral lessons. The Simpsons pioneered the single-camera format for animation, rapid-fire jokes, and satire that questioned authority rather than reinforcing it. Every comedy show made after 1990 exists in The Simpsons' shadow, whether creators acknowledge it or not. South Park owes its existence to The Simpsons proving that animation could be adult and satirical. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have said repeatedly that The Simpsons showed them what was possible. They took the satire further and made it cruder, but the basic concept, using animation to comment on American society, came directly from The Simpsons' example. Family Guy is simultaneously The Simpsons' biggest fan and worst imitator. Seth MacFarlane studied The Simpsons obsessively and tried to replicate its success, but he learned the wrong lessons, copying the pop culture references and celebrity cameos from later seasons instead of the character-driven satire from early ones. Family Guy succeeds commercially while failing artistically because it's The Simpsons without the soul. Bob's Burgers represents what The Simpsons could have become if it embraced heart over cynicism. The Belcher family loves each other genuinely and supports each other through struggles. Bob's Burgers learned The Simpsons' storytelling techniques, but applied them to characters who grow and change. It's what The Simpsons might have been if it prioritized character development over maintaining a static status quo. The show's academic legacy is surprisingly robust. Universities teach courses on The Simpsons analyzing its philosophy, politics, and cultural impact. Books have been written examining the show's satire, mathematics references, and religious commentary. The Simpsons is taken seriously as art in ways that would have seemed impossible when it was just a crude cartoon mocking Cosby Show sitcom conventions. What makes The Simpsons special to millennials specifically is that it defined their childhood relationship with television and humor. Kids born in the mid-'80s to mid-'90s grew up with The Simpsons as constant presence, teaching them to question authority, recognize hypocrisy, and laugh at the absurdity of adult life. The show functioned as counter-programming to parent culture, giving kids permission to be skeptical about institutions that older generations took seriously. Meme culture owes everything to The Simpsons. The show created templates that internet users endlessly remix. Steamed hams became a bizarre phenomenon where people create hundreds of variations on one scene from 22 short films about Springfield. The scene wasn't particularly special in context, but it had the right rhythm and absurdity to become endlessly remixable. Seymour and Chalmers arguing about whether hamburgers are steamed hams shouldn't be iconic, but here we are. The X is just Y with extra steps. Construction comes from The Simpsons. Why you? Little as a rage response. The old man yells at Cloud headline image. I'm in danger with Ralph Wiggum. Worst day ever. As response to minor annoyance. These templates spread through internet culture until nobody remembers where they came from. The Simpsons is the source code for how millennials communicate. The show's critique of capitalism and consumerism shaped how an entire generation views the American economic system. Episodes showing corporations as soulless profit machines, politicians as corrupt sellouts, and the American dream as a lie taught kids to be skeptical about structures their parents accepted. The Simpsons normalized anti-capitalism before most Americans would admit capitalism had problems. Mr. Burns specifically became the avatar for evil corporate greed. When people talk about billionaires being out of touch or corporations destroying the environment, they're unconsciously referencing Mr. Burns blocking out the sun and poisoning Springfield. The The show gave people a cultural shorthand for discussing how wealth corrupts and power enables cruelty. The show's representation of the working class struggling to survive predated the 2008 financial crisis by decades, but helped people understand it when it arrived. The Simpsons showed that American families were one crisis away from financial ruin, even during good economic times. When the recession hit and everyone realized how precarious their situation was, The Simpsons had already been depicting that reality for 20 years. Springfield, as a dysfunctional American town, became the template for understanding how communities fail. Every town with corrupt government, failing schools, and environmental damage is a little bit Springfield. The show didn't invent these problems, but it gave people a framework for recognizing them. When you see your own city council making stupid decisions, you think of Mayor Quimby. When your kid's school is falling apart, you think of Springfield Elementary. The show's religious satire taught Americans to laugh at faith without being cruel about it. Ned Flanders represents extremism, but he's portrayed sympathetically as someone trying his best. Reverend Lovejoy shows how religious leaders can be just as flawed as anyone else. The show mocked religious hypocrisy while respecting genuine faith, creating space for Americans to question religious authority without abandoning belief entirely. The way The Simpsons normalized gay characters deserves credit, even though the representation was often stereotypical. Waylon Smithers being gay was an open secret for years before the show confirmed it explicitly. Patty Selma coming out was treated as no big deal. By having gay characters exist naturally in Springfield's world, the show prepared audiences to accept gay people in their real communities. The show's environmental message through plots about pollution and corporate destruction influenced how a generation thinks about ecology. Mr. Burns dumping, toxic waste, Springfield's lake becoming polluted, and various ecological disasters showed that environmental damage comes from corporate greed rather than individual failings. The Simpsons connected environmentalism to anti-capitalism in ways that influenced activist thinking. What makes The Simpsons' legacy complicated is that the show's continued existence damages its own reputation. If The Simpsons had ended in 1998, it would be remembered as a perfect 10-year run that changed television forever. Instead, it's a 35-year institution where 2/3 of episodes range from mediocre to bad. The show's immortality killed its legend. The catchphrases that entered language show The Simpsons' deepest cultural penetration. Dough is in the Oxford English Dictionary. Homer's annoyed grunt became a universal expression of frustration. People say it constantly without thinking of The Simpsons. That's how thoroughly the show infiltrated language. Its contributions became invisible. Meh, as an expression of indifference, came from The Simpsons before spreading everywhere. The show didn't invent the word, but popularized it beyond Yiddish origins. Now it's standard English for expressing apathy. A cartoon about a dysfunctional family gave America a new way to express not caring. Cromulent and ambigun are fake words the show invented that sound real enough that people use them seriously. This shows The Simpsons' linguistic creativity went beyond borrowing existing expressions. The show created vocabulary that filled gaps in English, giving people ways to express ideas that didn't have existing words. The Simpsons' educational impact is genuinely surprising. Episodes teaching about Supreme Court, cases, historical events, and scientific concepts stuck with viewers because they were entertaining rather than preachy. Kids learned about constitutional amendments from episodes satirizing them. Math teachers used Homer's three-dimensional universe adventure to explain higher dimensions. The show educated while pretending to just entertain. The voice acting legacy created career paths for people like Hank Azaria, Harry Shearer, and Nancy Cartwright, who became wealthy through animated voice work. Before The Simpsons, voice acting was a niche profession with limited opportunities. The show's success proved that voice actors could become stars, and that animation was worth investing in with quality performances. The merchandising empire proved that adult animation could be profitable beyond advertising revenue. Simpsons t-shirts, toys, video games, and theme park attractions generated billions of dollars. Fox made more money from merchandise than from the show itself. This taught studios that animation intellectual property was valuable beyond the original media. The show's relationship with Fox is deeply ironic. The Simpsons spent decades satirizing corporate media consolidation and conservative politics. Fox News broadcasts right-wing propaganda, while Fox Entertainment airs a show mocking everything Fox News represents. The network allowed this contradiction because The Simpsons made too much money to cancel for ideological reasons. Disney's acquisition of The Simpsons makes the irony even worse. The show that mocked corporate consolidation is now owned by the ultimate media conglomerate. Disney Plus streams episodes censored to remove content that might offend modern sensibilities. The anti-establishment satire became a Disney product for families, completing the circle of co-option that the show itself predicted. The Simpsons' true legacy is teaching people to be cynical about institutions while being unable to imagine alternatives to those institutions. The show mocked capitalism, government, religion, media, and family, while ultimately reinforcing that these broken systems are all we have. Springfield never improves because improvement is impossible. The best anyone can do is recognize how broken everything is while continuing to participate. This is The Simpsons' gift to millennials, recognizing dysfunction without expecting change, seeing how the system fails while accepting failure as inevitable, laughing at disaster because what else can you do? The show created a generation that expects nothing and is still disappointed, that sees through every lie but lacks power to change anything, that wants better but settles for familiar. At the end of the day, The Simpsons did something really special, even if it ultimately became the thing it was satirizing. It gave an entire generation a shared language for understanding the absurdity of modern life and created humor that challenged power rather than reinforcing it. The little yellow family who mocked America became a corporate empire that won't die even when it should, which is the most American ending imaginable. The show taught us that families are dysfunctional but necessary, that institutions are corrupt but unavoidable, that change is impossible but still worth desiring. These contradictions define modern life, and The Simpsons articulated them before most people could name what they were feeling. That's why the show mattered, even though it should have ended 20 years ago. If you enjoyed our video, subscribe to our channel for more videos like these.